Hey fam. This is Harryverse X. Today's story is gonna blow your mind. What if Wolverine and Jean Grey found Harry age 4 and Phoenix Adamantium made him Immortal Mutant Wizard? Show some love with a like and subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Claws. The rain came down hard on Privet Drive. Not the polite English drizzle that locals complained about over tea, this was the kind of rain that had opinions, that drove itself sideways under awnings and found the gap between your collar and your neck with something that felt almost personal. It had been coming down since noon and showed no sign of stopping, and by 9 o'clock the street was empty and gleaming, every house lit from within like a row of paper lanterns, every curtain drawn. Logan walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders hunched against the wet, though not because he was cold. He hadn't really been cold since 1973. He hunched because walking like a man who wanted to be left alone was usually enough to ensure that he would be, and tonight he needed that. He had a headache that had been sitting behind his left eye since Ottawa, and the rain wasn't helping. Jean walked beside him, her red hair plastered dark against her jacket, and she wasn't hunching. She never hunched. She walked like someone who had decided the rain was simply a thing that existed and she had no particular argument with it, her arms loose at her sides, her eyes moving steadily along the row of identical houses with that look she got when she was listening to something nobody else could hear. This street is aggressively normal, Logan said. I mean aggressively. It's like they had a meeting. Logan. I'm just saying. You could lose a person in a place like this. You could lose anything. He glanced at her. You're doing the thing. I'm not doing anything. Your left temple does a thing when you're picking something up. Little muscle. Right there. He tapped his own temple. You've been doing it since we turned onto this street. Jean stopped walking. She was standing in front of number 4, which looked identical to number 3 and number 5 except for the hanging basket by the door, currently empty and swinging in the wet wind. Her head tilted slightly to one side, the way it did when she was trying to locate a signal through interference. There's a child in that house, she said. There are children in all these houses. It's a residential street. Not like this one. She turned to him, and in the orange wash of the streetlight her eyes were doing something, not glowing, exactly, but awake in a way they hadn't been a moment ago. Logan. This child's mind is, I can't even, it's like trying to look at the sun. There's something in there that doesn't make any sense. The power reading is, she stopped. Pressed 2 fingers against her upper lip. Took them away and looked at the small dark smear on her fingertips. Nosebleed, Logan said flatly. I'm aware. Jean. Your nose doesn't bleed from a kid's mind. I know that. She wiped her hand on her jacket and kept looking at the house. Her expression had shifted into something he recognized, not fear, but the look she wore when she encountered a problem she felt morally responsible for. He had learned, over years of working beside her, that particular look was the beginning of a decision she'd already made. He's in pain, she said quietly. Not acute pain right now. It's older than that. It's been going on for a long time and it's so ordinary to him that he doesn't even frame it as suffering anymore. He's just waiting. He's been waiting for so long that he doesn't know what he's waiting for. Logan looked at the house. How old? 4. Maybe just turned 4. He was quiet for a moment. What kind of pain? Jean looked at him. He looked at the house. Right, he said. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. Right. The lock on the front door of number 4 Privet Drive was a perfectly ordinary lock, and it took Logan approximately 1 second to deal with it in a way that left the doorframe slightly splintered and the Dursley's hallway open to the rain. Jean was behind him and she was already doing the thing where she extended her senses through the house like a hand feeling along a wall in the dark, mapping it before they were 10 feet inside. Upstairs, Vernon, she murmured, reading names off minds the way other people read names off doors. Petunia. Boy, Dudley. He's enormous for his age, actually, that's, she stopped. There. She pointed at the cupboard under the stairs. It was a completely ordinary cupboard. There was a small bolt on the outside of the door, the kind you'd use to keep it from swinging open in a draft, except that it was on the outside, which meant it was for keeping whatever was inside from getting out. There were small marks on the door at about knee height, little scratches, the kind fingernails made on wood when you were very small and very determined and had nowhere else to put the energy. Logan crouched and looked at the scratches for a moment without saying anything. Then he put his hand flat on the door, very gently, and just held it there. Inside, there was a sound, a held breath. Small. Careful. A child who had learned that sounds brought attention and attention was rarely good. "Hey," Logan said. His voice was different than it usually was. Not soft exactly, Logan's voice didn't really do soft, but level. Deliberate. The voice of someone who was in no hurry and meant no harm and was going to stay exactly where he was until the universe reorganized itself around that fact. "Nobody's gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna open this door." Silence from inside. "My name's Logan. The woman behind me is Jean. We're not from around here." A tiny, cautious voice from inside the cupboard said, "The door's locked." "Not anymore," Logan said, and slid the bolt. The door swung open. The boy inside was small even for 4, underfed in a way that showed in the sharpness of his collarbones and the oversized quality of his clothing, which appeared to belong to a much larger child. He had black hair that went in every direction and green eyes so vivid they caught the light from the hallway and held it, and he was sitting on a thin mattress with a ratty blanket pulled up to his chest and a toy soldier clutched in one hand, and he was looking at Logan with an expression that was not fear. That was the thing. That was the thing Logan noticed immediately, because fear was something he could smell, and this child did not smell of fear. He smelled of hunger and of the particular chemical signature of chronic stress, yes, but in this moment, looking at a large, rough-faced stranger who had just opened his locked door at 9 o'clock on a rainy night, the boy looked curious. "You broke it," the boy said, looking at the bolt. "Yep. Uncle Vernon will be angry." "Uncle Vernon," Logan said carefully, "can take that up with me." The boy considered this. He had the evaluating gaze of a child who has learned to read adults very quickly because the stakes of misreading them were high. He looked at Logan. He looked past Logan at Jean. He looked back at Logan. "Are you police?" he asked. "No. Social workers." He was 4 years old and he knew what social workers were. Logan filed that away in a place that was getting very crowded. "No," Logan said. "We're something else. Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes moved, a tiny, involuntary flicker down and then back up, the reflex of someone who had learned not to want things out loud. "I'm fine," he said. That wasn't an answer. A pause. Then, quietly, "Yes." Jean knelt down beside Logan. The boy's eyes moved to her, and something happened in his expression, a loosening, barely perceptible, like a fist that had been clenched so long it had forgotten how to open, beginning the process anyway. Jean's ability to project calm was not psychic exactly, or it was, but she kept it light, kept it honest, nothing that would override a person's own feelings, just a kind of warmth extended through the air like an offered hand. "Hi," she said. "I'm Jean." "You said that," the boy said. "He said that." "I did." She smiled, and it was real, and it landed on the boy like sunlight through a window. "What's your name?" Another pause. As if the question required consideration. As if having a name that someone wanted to know was not a thing that happened often enough to have a quick answer ready. "Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." They were not supposed to take the child. That had not been the plan. The plan had been a reconnaissance pass through Surrey on their way back from a lead on a mutant adolescent who had turned out to be, disappointingly, a perfectly ordinary teenager with a very localized gas leak near his bedroom. They were supposed to be back at the Institute by midnight. Logan was supposed to be eating leftover chili and arguing with Scott about the training roster. Instead, Jean was sitting in the front seat of the truck with Harry Potter asleep across her lap. He had been asleep within 6 minutes of being placed in the warm cab, the sleep of someone who had been running on cortisol and caution for so long that the moment genuine safety arrived, the body simply shut down, and Logan was driving and neither of them had said anything for 40 minutes. "I called the professor," Jean said quietly. "And?" "He said to bring him in." "He said," she stopped, running her fingers very gently through the boy's chaotic hair. "He said the signature I described was unlike anything in the Cerebro records. He wants to see it himself." "It's not an it," Logan said. "It's a kid." "I know that. Just making sure we're clear." "Logan." Jean looked at him, and in the dash lights her face was very serious. "When I touched his mind, when I went in just a little, just enough to check that he was okay, there's something in there that I've never felt before. It's not telepathy. It's not telekinesis. It's not any mutation I've ever encountered. It feels like," she shook her head, searching for words. "You know what it feels like when you're standing too close to a fire? Not when you're burning, not when it hurts, just, that feeling of something immense and very much alive, right at the edge of your space. Yeah. It feels like that. But layered over it, underneath it, woven through it, there's something else. Something older. Something that has its own logic and I cannot access it because it doesn't operate on the same frequencies I use." She looked down at the boy sleeping on her lap. "He's 4 years old and he's been locked in a cupboard and whatever is in him has been sitting there patiently, waiting, like it knows something." Logan drove. Rain on the windshield, wipers working, the highway opening ahead of them. "What does his blood smell like?" Jean asked. It was a strange question from a stranger woman than most people knew she was. Logan had mentioned once, years ago, that blood had information in it, information he could read the way Jean read minds, roughly, intuitively, through a sense other people didn't have access to. She had filed that away and apparently kept it. He had actually been noticing it since the cupboard. He had been turning it over in the back of his mind the way you turned a coin when you weren't thinking about it. "Metal," he said. "Your kind of metal?" "No. Not adamantium. Something like it but, cleaner. Like adamantium and something else mixed together, something that doesn't have a name yet. Something warm." He was quiet for a moment. "And fire. He smells like fire underneath everything else. Not burned. Like fire itself." Jean looked out the window. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay," she said again. "Let's take him home." The Xavier Institute at 2 in the morning was mostly quiet. Mostly. There was always someone in the kitchen. It was that kind of place, a building that housed too many people with too much energy and too complicated a relationship with regular sleep cycles, and tonight it was Aurora, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a book, and who looked up when Logan came in carrying a sleeping 4-year-old against his shoulder with the careful deliberateness of a man holding something he was not used to holding and was absolutely not going to drop. She looked at the child. She looked at Logan. She looked at Jean, who came in behind them peeling off her wet jacket. His name is Harry," Jean said quietly. "Can you get the blanket from the—" Aurora was already up, already moving, because Aurora had the remarkable quality of not requiring more information than she was given before she acted on whatever was needed. She came back with a blanket from the small sitting room off the hallway and Logan held still while she arranged it around the child, who made a small sound in his sleep and pressed his face more firmly against Logan's shoulder. Logan's jaw did something complicated. "The professor wants to see him in the morning," Jean told Aurora, keeping her voice low. "He can sleep in the yellow room," Aurora said. "3rd floor. It's quiet up there. He should have someone with him when he wakes up," Jean said. "He's going to be, I don't want him to wake up alone in a strange place." "I'll be there," Logan said. Jean looked at him. Something in her expression, not surprise, exactly. More like recognition of something she had suspected. "Okay," she said. Logan took Harry upstairs. The yellow room was small and it had a window that looked out over the Institute's grounds, and in the dark the grounds were just a suggestion of space and trees and the smell of wet grass, but it was a good smell, a real smell, nothing like the closed-in stuffiness of that cupboard. Logan put Harry down on the bed, a real bed, blankets and pillows, the kind of bed that was just a bed and not a statement about someone's worth, and straightened up and stood there for a moment looking at him. The kid barely took up a third of the mattress. He'd curled immediately onto his side, both hands up near his face, still holding onto the toy soldier with the grip of someone who had learned that things left on their own got taken. "Nobody's taking the soldier," Logan told him, though he was asleep. He pulled the chair from the corner of the room over to the bedside, sat in it, crossed his arms, and waited for morning. Harry woke up at 5:47 a.m. Logan knew the exact time because he had been watching the window go from black to gray to the particular pale silver that meant dawn was considering its options, and the moment the light shifted to that silver Harry's eyes opened, sharp and immediate, not groggy, not slow, the waking of a child who had learned that the transition between sleep and consciousness should be as fast as possible. He lay completely still for 3 seconds, looking at the ceiling. Then he sat up, looked around the room, looked at Logan. "You're still here," Harry said. "Yep." "You stayed all night?" "Yep." Harry processed this. He looked at the window, at the grounds below where the morning light was starting to touch the tops of the trees. He looked at the room, the yellow walls, the bookshelf with actual books on it, the rug on the floor, the wardrobe in the corner, all of it clean and ordinary and belonging to no particular child's cruelty or preference. "Where is this?" he asked. "New York. It's a school. Xavier's Institute for Gifted Students." Logan leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees. "You know what a mutant is?" Harry shook his head. "It's a person who's born different. With abilities that regular people don't have. This school is for people like that. Like Jean, she can read minds, move things with her thoughts. Aurora, the woman downstairs, she can control weather." Harry looked at him steadily. "What can you do?" Logan held up his right hand. 3 claws slid out from between his knuckles, adamantium, bright in the morning light, completely still. Harry looked at them with enormous interest and no fear whatsoever. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Every time," Logan said. "But you still do it. Doesn't stop me." Harry looked at the claws for another moment, then back at Logan's face. "What can I do?" he asked. Logan retracted the claws. "We don't know yet. But Jean says there's something in you that's very big. And we'd like to find out what it is, if you'll let us." "Will you send me back?" Harry asked. The question was delivered flat, without particular inflection, the way you asked about weather, like the answer had weight but the asking of it couldn't afford to. "To that house?" Logan said. "Yes." "No," Logan said. Full stop. No qualifications. "No, we won't." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Whatever he found in Logan's face, and Logan's face was not an easy one to read, was not a face that was typically described as reassuring, must have been sufficient, because something shifted. Not dramatically. Not a breakdown or a flood of relief. Just a small, quiet settling, like a stone finding the bottom of water and being still. "Okay," Harry said. "Then, is there food?" "Yeah," Logan said. "Come on." He ate 4 pieces of toast, 2 eggs, half a banana, and a glass of milk, and through all of it he ate with the focus and efficiency of someone who was not entirely sure when the next opportunity would be, and who had learned not to waste a single bite. He sat at the enormous kitchen table. The Institute's kitchen was built for a small army, because in practice it fed one, and ate without looking up much, though his eyes tracked every person who moved through the space with that same quiet, measuring attention. Aurora made the eggs and didn't fuss over him and didn't ask him questions while he was eating, both of which were exactly right. She was a woman who understood that people needed to be fed before they needed to be talked at, and she placed food in front of Harry with the same natural ease she brought to everything and went back to her tea. Jean came in halfway through the toast. She was showered and changed and carrying a large mug of coffee, and she sat down across from Harry and said nothing for a moment, just looked at him with that open, warm attention she had. Harry looked up from his toast. "Good morning," he said, with the careful politeness of a child who had been told his manners were the one thing expected of him. "Good morning," Jean said. "How did you sleep?" "Good." He seemed slightly surprised by the answer as he gave it. "Very good. The bed is," he stopped, and whatever he'd been about to say about the bed was something he thought better of completing. "Good," he said again. "Harry," Jean said carefully, "do you know, did anyone ever tell you about your parents?" His hands went still on the toast for a half-second. Then he picked it up again. "They died in a car crash," he said. "When I was a baby. That's what Uncle Vernon says." Jean's expression didn't change. Her eyes met Logan's briefly over Harry's head, and the conversation they had in that 2-second glance would have taken humans 10 minutes of talking to cover. She looked back at Harry. "Okay," she said. She didn't say "that's not right" or "I know the truth." There was a time for that, and it was not over breakfast on the first morning. "Okay. You don't have to worry about any of that right now. Right now you're here, and you're safe, and when you're done eating, I thought we might take a walk around the grounds. Would you like that?" Harry took a bite of toast. Considered. "Will the man with the chair be there? Professor Xavier?" Jean smiled. "He'd like to meet you later. This morning is just us, if you want." Harry finished the toast. Drank the milk. Folded his napkin beside the plate, a habit that had clearly been drilled in from outside rather than grown from any natural inclination, the gesture of someone performing correct behavior for an audience that wasn't there. Then he looked up at Jean with those vivid green eyes and said, "Yes. I'd like a walk." The grounds of the Xavier Institute in early morning were something. Wide lawns that ran down to a tree line, gardens that Aurora kept with the casual perfection of someone for whom growing things was less a hobby and more a conversation, a path that wound around the east side of the building past a small pond where ducks were doing their pragmatic morning business. The sky had cleared overnight, the rain gone, washed clean, the kind of autumn morning that was cold and bright and smelled of everything at once. Harry walked beside Jean with his hands in the pockets of the borrowed sweatshirt Logan had found for him. It was far too big and he had to roll the sleeves up 4 times, and looked at everything. Not with the overwhelmed expression of a child who had never seen beautiful things. With the intense, cataloging attention of someone building an internal map. "Do you go to school?" Jean asked. "Mrs. Figg's," Harry said. "Sometimes. She smells like cats." "What do you like when you're not at Mrs. Figg's?" Harry was quiet for a moment, walking. "I like watching things," he said. "Bugs. How they move. And I like," he paused, like he was weighing whether this was safe to say. "Sometimes things happen that I don't mean to make happen. Aunt Petunia's flowers grew back the same day after Dudley pulled them up. And once when I was very scared I got onto the roof." "You climbed onto the roof?" "I didn't climb," Harry said carefully. "I was on the ground and then I was on the roof." Jean looked down at him. He was looking at the ducks on the pond, his expression perfectly neutral, like he was reporting a minor meteorological event. "Harry," she said, "what you just described, that's extraordinary. Do you know that? Uncle Vernon called it freakishness." The word dropped into the morning air flat and ugly, and Harry said it with such complete absence of defensiveness that it was clear he had worked very hard, for a very long time, to drain it of its power to hurt him. He had succeeded, mostly. Mostly. "It's not freakishness," Jean said. "It's power. Those are very different things." She stopped walking, and when she stopped, Harry stopped too and looked up at her. "Where you were last night, that's not where you're supposed to be. And the people who told you that you were wrong, or strange, or bad, they were afraid, and they were small, and they were wrong." Harry looked at her for a moment. His expression was not the expression of a child receiving comfort. It was the expression of a child conducting a careful assessment of whether something was true. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because I can feel what you are," Jean said. "Right now, standing here. And it's not small." "It is," she shook her head slightly, like she was trying to find the right scale. "It's like standing next to a star, Harry." He thought about this. Looked back at the ducks. "I don't feel like a star," he said. "Stars don't usually," Jean said. "They just burn." It was mid-morning when Charles Xavier met Harry Potter. Charles had been in his study since 7, reviewing the notes Jean had sent ahead, running the partial cerebro scan she'd managed remotely, reading the data and then reading it again because the first time he had assumed there was an error. The power signature was unprecedented. It had elements he recognized, a faint but coherent telepathic resonance, a telekinetic potential that dwarfed Jean's by a factor that made his hands go still on the printout, and elements he had no framework for at all. Whatever they were not mutation. They followed a different logic, moved through different channels, operated by different rules. He had spent 3 hours trying to categorize them and arrived at nothing except the unsettling certainty that his categories were insufficient. Harry came into the study with Jean beside him and looked at the room the way he looked at everything, with that complete, quiet attention. He looked at the books, the fireplace, the wheelchair, Charles himself. "Hello, Harry," Charles said. "Hello," Harry said. "You're the professor." "I am, yes." "Please sit down." Harry sat in the chair across the desk, straight-backed, hands in his lap, and looked at Charles with eyes that were far too old for a 4-year-old's face. Not in a damaged way, or not only in a damaged way, but in the way of someone who had been having to make accurate assessments of people for their survival since before they had the vocabulary to describe what they were doing. "Do you know why you're here?" Charles asked. "Because I'm different," Harry said. "Yes. And because Jean and Logan wanted to make sure you were safe." Charles leaned forward slightly. "Harry, with your permission, I'd like to, very gently, very briefly, take a look at your mind. The way Jean does. I won't do it without asking first. And I'll stop the moment you want me to." Harry considered him. "Will it hurt?" "I'll make absolutely sure it doesn't." Another moment of consideration. Then, "All right." Charles reached out, carefully, at a fraction of his usual capacity, like a man entering a dark room he hadn't been in before, and touched the surface of Harry's mind. He was prepared for extraordinary. Jean had told him. He had read the data. He had spent 3 hours recalibrating his expectations. He was not prepared. The first layer was the surface, Harry's active consciousness, clear, sharp, watchful, processing input with a speed and precision that was itself unusual for a 4-year-old but not impossible. Below that, the emotional landscape, the long, careful compression of feelings that had nowhere to go, the tunneled practicality of a child who had decided that surviving required setting himself aside. He'd seen that pattern before. It broke his heart in the same way it always did. But below that, he pulled back. Quickly. Not because it had hurt, but because what he had touched was so vastly beyond any frame of reference he possessed that remaining in contact with it felt like the intellectual equivalent of staring into something that went all the way down without a bottom. He sat very still for a moment. Harry watched him. "That," Charles said carefully, "was remarkable." "In a good way?" Harry asked. "In a way I don't have adjectives for yet," Charles said honestly. "Harry, how would you like to stay here?" "Not as a test subject," he added quickly, "not as a case study. But as a student. A resident. The way everyone here lives and learns." He paused. Jean and Logan are here. You'd see them every day. Harry looked at Jean, who was standing by the window. She gave him nothing, no nod, no signal, just her eyes on him and the warmth she was always radiating, giving him the space to decide. He looked back at Charles. "I can stay in the yellow room?" he asked. "As long as you like," Charles said. "And I don't have to go back?" "Never," Charles said. Harry sat quietly for a moment. Outside, through the study window, the morning had gone golden, autumn light coming through the trees in long slanted columns. "Yes," Harry said. "I'll stay." That night, at 3 in the morning, Jean woke up. She wasn't sure what woke her, the sense of something pressing at the edge of her sleep, not urgent but insistent, a hand on a shoulder rather than a shout. She lay in the dark for a moment, and then she was up and in the hall and moving toward the yellow room before she had consciously decided to, following the thread of something she could feel but not quite see. She opened the door quietly. Harry was sitting up in bed in the dark, not crying. He wasn't a child who cried easily, she was already learning that about him, but with his knees pulled up to his chest and both arms wrapped around them, and the toy soldier on the pillow beside him, and his eyes open and very far away. "Hey," Jean said softly. He focused on her. "I had a dream," he said. She came in, sat on the edge of the bed. "What happened in it?" "A green light," he said. "There's always a green light. And then a lot of noise and then it's quiet and there's no one." He paused. "I don't know what it is. But it's real. It's not like other dreams. It's like a memory of something I wasn't big enough to understand yet." Jean looked at him and felt something move in her chest, not pity, nothing so small as pity, but a deep, burning recognition. She knew what it was to carry power you hadn't chosen and memories that weren't yours yet and a past that was waiting for you to grow into it. "Sometimes," she said, "our power shows us things before we're ready to understand them. And that's scary. But it also means your power is trying to talk to you. It trusts you with it." Harry looked at her. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then you're not ready yet. That's okay. I'll sit here until you fall asleep." "You don't have to, I know," Jean said. She sat on the floor with her back against the side of the bed, and the room was warm and dark, and after a little while Harry lay back down. And after a little while after that, she felt his breathing change, felt the specific quality of his mental presence shift into the loose, unguarded patterns of deep sleep. She sat with him for a long time. And in Harry's sleeping mind, beneath the layers of exhaustion and adjustment and cautious new hope, beneath all of that, something moved. Something very old and very large, turning over slowly in the deep like a creature in the warmth of a volcanic vent, aware of the change in temperature and the change in circumstance and perhaps even aware of the woman sitting on the floor nearby, the woman who carried something similar in her own depths. It turned. It settled. And it burned, very quietly, with patient and tremendous joy. Jean felt it at the edges of her own consciousness, that warmth she described to Logan, that sense of standing at the edge of a fire, and she felt it reach out toward her own depths like recognition, like a call between the same species from opposite ends of a forest. She sat very still. Then, quietly, she reached back. Not with power. Not with any particular intention. Just with the wordless, honest language of "I know what you are and you are welcome here." The warmth deepened. Outside, the stars were out over the Xavier Institute's grounds, and the ducks on the pond were asleep, and the trees were still in the windless dark, and in the yellow room on the 3rd floor a woman and a sleeping child sat in the quiet together, and something ancient and immense had just made a decision that neither world, not the mutant world, not the magical world, was remotely prepared for. It had chosen them both. Chapter 2, What the Wolves Taught the Boy. The first thing Logan taught Harry was how to fall. Not how to fight. Not how to use his hands or his strength or whatever was building in him that made Cerebro's displays do things Charles described, with academic restraint, as unprecedented. The first thing, the foundational thing, was falling, specifically, how to fall without flinching, How to meet the ground on your own terms instead of the ground's, how to roll through impact so that the momentum carried you somewhere useful instead of leaving you flat and winded and done. Harry was 5 years old, and he took to it immediately. Again, Logan said. Harry got up from the mat, brushed his palms on his shorts, and threw himself sideways with complete commitment. Better, Logan said. But you're still tensing your shoulders before you hit. They go up by themselves. Make them stop. How? You know the thing you do when Aurora tests the weather systems and the whole building shakes and everyone else grabs for something to hold? Harry thought about it. I don't grab. Right. That. Do that with your shoulders. Harry threw himself sideways again. This time the roll was clean, fluid, carrying him back up to his feet in one uninterrupted motion, and Logan gave a short nod that was, on Logan's face, equivalent to a standing ovation. There it is, he said. Harry landed on his feet, slightly flushed and grinning. He didn't grin a lot. It had taken several months at the Institute before the grin started appearing with any frequency, and when it did it was always sudden, like a light switched on, like he'd forgotten to maintain the careful neutral expression and something real had gotten out. Logan had learned not to react to the grin because reacting to it made it go away faster. Can we do the other thing now? Harry asked. What other thing? The thing where you run at me and I have to, no. But I was close last time. You were not close. You went sideways when you should have gone through. I could have gone through. You always can, Logan said. Going sideways is giving ground. Going through is taking it. Different thing. Harry considered this with the serious attention he gave to everything Logan told him, the expression of a child genuinely filing information away rather than performing the act of listening. At 5, he had already developed a habit of silence before response. He processed first and spoke second, which was unusual enough at his age that the Institute's visiting child psychologist, a pleasant woman named Dr. Reyes, had noted it in her assessment as emotionally precocious with possible dissociative adaptation, which Logan had read and then set down with the careful deliberateness of a man who was not going to say what he thought about it. Okay, Harry said. Going through. Tomorrow, Logan said. Today you eat lunch. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask. The Xavier Institute had a rhythm that Harry learned the way you learned a language when you were immersed in it, not through formal study but through absorption, through daily contact with its patterns and textures until it became the background of your world so completely that imagining a different background became difficult. Mornings were training. Not always with Logan. Charles ran cognitive exercises, and Aurora walked him through the gardens and taught him things about growing that were never quite only about plants, and Jean worked with him on the specific architecture of his mind, the layout of it, what was where and why. Afternoons were books, or class with the older students, or the particular unstructured time that Charles insisted on and that Harry initially had no idea what to do with. What do I do now? He'd asked, the first afternoon Charles sent him outside with 2 hours and no instructions. Whatever you like, Charles said. Harry stood in the doorway to the garden and looked at the 2 hours like a foreign country. He eventually found the pond. He sat next to it for a while watching the ducks, and then he lay on his back in the grass and watched the sky, and then, and this was the thing that crept up on him from nowhere, genuinely surprised him, he reached over and picked a single yellow flower from the edge of the garden bed and just held it, turning it, feeling the very particular aliveness of a thing that was growing and had no agenda about it. Something moved in his hand. Warmth. Light, barely perceptible, like a candle seen through frosted glass. The flower, which had been slightly wilted from the morning heat, straightened. Harry sat up and looked at it. He put it back in the ground. The stem pushed in without resistance, as if the earth were accepting it back, and by the time he stood up and looked down the flower was standing as if it had always been standing, bloom open, entirely fine. He went back inside and didn't tell anyone. Not because he was hiding it. He'd stopped hiding things shortly after arriving, because the cumulative message of the Institute was that hiding things was unnecessary and also slightly insulting to the people around you who were all, in their various ways, also operating at frequencies the regular world called wrong. He didn't tell anyone because he wanted to sit with it himself first. To understand what it was before it became something other people were interested in. He was 5, and he was already doing this. Jean found out about the fire by accident. Harry was 6 when it happened. He was in the library, a room he had colonized with the thoroughness of a small, bookish general, to the point where Charles kept finding his markers and notes tucked into the margins of volumes that should by rights be inaccessible to a first grader, and he was reading something about astronomy, because space had recently become one of his consuming interests, and he fell asleep in the armchair by the window. He was dreaming. Jean could feel it from 2 rooms away. His dreams had a particular quality, a warmth and pressure to them that was unlike anyone else's at the Institute, unlike anyone else she'd ever touched, and usually she stayed out of them out of respect for his privacy. But this one was different. This one was lit up, broadcasting at a frequency she hadn't felt from him before. She came into the library and Harry was asleep in the armchair and his hands, resting on the open book in his lap, were on fire. Not burning. Not in pain, his face was peaceful, completely slack in the way only genuine deep sleep produced. But from his palms, or from just above his palms, there was fire. Gold and white, not orange, not the usual colors of combustion, and it was moving gently in the way fire moved in no wind, and the book beneath his hands was perfectly uncharred and the armchair was untouched and the fire was simply, there. Being fire. Belonging to him. Jean stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she went to the armchair, and she sat on its arm, and she put her hand lightly over his, and she felt the fire move, felt it register her presence the way a cat feels a hand and leans into it, and it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, warm in the way of recognition, of kinship. Harry's eyes opened. He looked at his hands. He looked at the fire. "Oh," he said. "Yeah," Jean said. "I was dreaming about stars," he said. "I know. I could feel it." She kept her hand over his. The fire moved between their fingers, lazy and content. "Does this feel like you? Like it belongs to you?" Harry looked at it seriously. "It feels like me, but also like something that was here before me. If that makes sense." "It makes complete sense," Jean said. "More sense than you know." She let the fire burn for a little while longer. Neither of them said anything. Outside the library window the afternoon was going golden, and the fire in Harry's hands was the same color, and Jean was thinking about something vast and patient that she'd felt in the dark of the yellow room 2 years ago, a thing that had reached out and she had reached back, and here was what that meeting was growing into. "Jean," Harry said. What is it?" "The fire thing. I think," she said carefully, "it's something very old and very powerful and it has decided that you're worth being part of. Which means that it's very good at making decisions." She looked at him. "But we're going to need to learn how it works. Together. Okay? You don't do this alone." Harry looked at the fire, which was beginning to fade now that he was fully awake and the dreaming warmth had receded. "Okay," he said. "But I want to know everything." "So do I," Jean said. He was 7 when his bones started. He didn't notice at first. It started as a warmth, deep tissue, not painful, the kind of heat that suggested something was happening at a level the nerves barely reached. Then one morning he woke up and flexed his hands and felt them differently, felt his skeleton like something he'd previously only been vaguely aware of come into clarity, like a building you'd lived in suddenly revealing its own structure. He pressed his palm against the wall and felt the solidity transfer differently, felt his own bones as something that could meet that solidity without yielding. He told Logan. Logan was quiet for a long time. He looked at Harry's hands, then at Harry's face. "Does it hurt?" he said. "No. It's just, there. More there." Logan sat down on the bench in the training room and was quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. This was a listening kind of quiet, directed inward rather than outward. "There's a metal in my bones," Logan said eventually. "Put there by people who had no business doing it. It's called adamantium. Hardest substance on Earth. Completely indestructible." He paused. "It hurt. When they did it. Hurt more than I can describe." Harry sat down next to him. He was 7, and he'd long since learned that sitting next to Logan without talking was sometimes the right move. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not your problem. It's still bad that it happened." Logan looked at him sideways. "Yeah," he said. "It's still bad. But mine doesn't hurt," Harry said. "And I don't think it's the same. It's warm. It feels like the fire thing, actually. Like the same source." Logan filed this in the same place he filed everything about Harry, a place that was getting very full, very complex, and that he thought about more than he'd anticipated thinking about anything since the 80s. "I'm telling Charles," he said. "I figured," Harry said. "And Jean. Obviously." Logan almost smiled. "You're very unbothered about this." Harry shrugged. "My bones are changing and I can make fire and I can sometimes hear what people are about to say before they say it. In this building, that makes me slightly more unusual than average. That's it." This time Logan did smile. "A small one, barely a movement, gone in a second." "Fair enough," he said. "Can we do the thing where you run at me now?" "Yeah," Logan said. "Now we can do that." Charles convened what he privately called a situation discussion and what everyone else privately called an emergency meeting that Charles was refusing to label as such in the professor's study, and it involved Jean, Logan, and Hank McCoy, who had arrived 2 days earlier for a research visit and now found himself examining the scan results of a 7-year-old skeletal structure with the expression of a man whose categories were in the process of being demolished. "The density is extraordinary," Hank said, setting the scans down. "It's not adamantium, the crystalline structure is different, the conductivity readings are, frankly, they're like nothing we know," Logan said. "I'm just contextualizing, Hank," Jean said. Hank adjusted his glasses. "It's a new material. Growing with him. Self-generating, apparently fed by whatever the Phoenix-adjacent energy signature is that's been registering on Cerebro since he arrived. The two systems seem to be talking to each other." He looked at the scans again. "He heals, yes." "Has anyone tested?" "He heals," Logan said flatly. "Fast. Faster than me." "That's not possible." "Yes, I know. He does it anyway." Charles, who had been sitting with his fingers steepled and his expression thoughtful since the beginning, said, "What concerns me isn't the physical mutation. Or the energy signature. What concerns me is what it means for his development, socially, psychologically, strategically. He's growing into something that neither world I'm aware of has produced before. He needs guidance." "He has guidance," Logan said. "He needs structured guidance. A framework. He needs to understand what he is before the world at large becomes aware that he exists, because when it does, and it will, there will be," Charles paused. "There will be interests. From multiple directions. And I want him to be ready." Jean was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Charles, if you start treating him like an asset to be prepared instead of a child to be raised, I will take him and Logan and I will find somewhere that doesn't do that." Charles looked at her. "I mean it," she said. Not angry, Jean wasn't angry often, and when she was it was very quiet and very thorough. "He spent 4 years being treated like a variable in someone else's equation. That's done now. He gets a childhood. He gets to be confused and funny and bad at things and good at things and to figure out who he is at his own pace." "I agree with you," Charles said. "Which is why I'm saying it now, in here, instead of structuring it around him without his knowledge." He looked at her steadily. "He deserves to know. He deserves to know what he is, what it might mean, what might come for him. And then he deserves to be allowed to decide how he feels about it. Jean held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. He's 7, Logan said. He's 7 with a mind that already operates like someone twice that age, Charles said. Which we all know. Nobody argued with that. Jean talked to Harry that evening, in the garden, after dinner, while the light was doing its long autumn thing over the tree line. She told him what they knew. Not all of it, she didn't know all of it herself, but the shape of it. The Phoenix Force, what she understood of it. The way it had recognized something in him. The bones. The fire. The voice she sometimes heard in the back of her own mind that was too large to be her own thought and too warm to be threatening. Harry sat on the garden bench with his knees up and listened to all of it without interrupting. So it's in you too, he said when she finished. The same thing. A part of it. Or it split. Or we're both anchors to it, somehow. I don't entirely understand the mechanism. But we're connected. Yes, Jean said. I think we are. Harry thought about this. The garden was going dark and blue around them, and somewhere in the trees a bird was doing its last business of the day. Good, Harry said. I'm glad it's you. Jean looked at him. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the tree line, chin on his knees, completely matter-of-fact about it. The way he was matter-of-fact about most of the large things. It was both one of the easiest and one of the most crushing things about him, that quality, because it was built on a foundation of having learned very early that large things did not care about your feelings and therefore you might as well be practical about them. She was working on that. Gently. Without pushing. I'm glad it's you too, she said. He leaned against her side. She put her arm around him. They stayed there until the stars came out. At 8, Harry had his first real fight. Not a training fight with Logan, not the productive controlled violence of the training room which had its own logic and its own satisfactions. A real one, with a 12-year-old named Marcus Trelawney whose parents had enrolled him at the Institute 3 months ago and who was large for his age and had decided, with the particular confidence of a bully who had not yet encountered meaningful resistance, that the small dark-haired boy who didn't react much was probably the easiest target in the building. He'd started small, the kind of thing that was almost deniable, a shoulder in the corridor, a comment just within earshot, the specific targeted social erosion that was its own kind of expertise. Harry had registered it, filed it, and continued what he was doing. Logan had noticed and said nothing, watching to see how Harry handled it, which was also a kind of teaching. The mistake Marcus made was doing it in front of other kids. They were in the recreation room, 8, 9, 10-year-olds scattered around, a game of cards in one corner, Ororo's plants growing in the window, and Marcus walked past Harry and knocked his book off the table with the deliberate carelessness of someone who needed the performance as much as the act, and said, "Freak." The room went quiet. Harry looked at his book on the floor. He looked at Marcus. "Pick it up," Harry said. Marcus laughed. "Make me." What happened next was over very quickly, and afterward Logan, who had been in the doorway and seen it, told Jean about it with something in his voice that was too complicated to be called pride but was in the same neighborhood. Harry stood up. He was small, still small, would be small for years, the delayed growth of early malnutrition working itself out slowly. Marcus had 8 centimeters and 30 pounds on him, easy. Harry stood up, walked to where Marcus was standing, and said, with absolute evenness, "Pick it up." Marcus shoved him. Harry didn't move. He took the shove, rolled through the force of it the way he'd been rolling through falls since he was 5, and came back upright without a stumble, and his expression never changed. Not angry. Not afraid. Just, there. Looking at Marcus with those green eyes that were more uncomfortable to be looked at by than eyes had any right to be. "How did you do that?" Marcus said, and there was already something uncertain in it. "Pick up the book," Harry said, "and we're done here." "Don't, and I'll put you on the floor and we're still done, but you'll feel it for longer." "You're 8. You're scared," Harry said. That's why you're being loud about it. I understand that. Whatever made you scared, I'm sorry it happened. But you don't get to put it on me. Marcus stared at him. The room was completely still. Then Marcus bent down, picked up the book, and put it on the table. Harry nodded, sat back down, and went back to reading. Marcus left the room. Several of the kids who'd been watching looked at Harry with a variety of expressions ranging from awe to confusion to the particular re-evaluation that happened when you'd underestimated something. Harry didn't look up from his book. In the doorway, Logan allowed himself a small smile. Somewhere in his 9th year Harry's telepathy arrived properly. Not as a trickle, nothing about Harry arrived as a trickle. It arrived like a door being opened into a room that had always been behind it, and the room was enormous and full of light and full of voices, and he sat down on the floor of his own bedroom and held his hands over his ears, and the gesture did nothing because it was never about his ears. Jean was there in 4 minutes. She found him sitting on the floor and she sat down across from him and she took his face in her hands and she said, with calm he could feel radiating off her like warmth off a radiator, "Look at me. Just me." One voice. "Find mine and hold on to it." He found hers. He held it. He used it as a rope in the dark. "Okay," she said. "Now build a wall. You've done this in our exercises, it's the same thing. I know it's harder now because it's not practice, but it's the same thing. Same structure. Same materials." He built the wall. It took 20 minutes, and it was not a neat wall, it was a desperate one, all jagged edges and varying heights, the psychic equivalent of stacking furniture against a door, but it held, and when it held the voices dropped to a manageable hum. He took his hands down from his ears. "There," Jean said. "There's so many," he said. "I know. How do you hear all of them, all the time?" "Less now than I used to." "You learn to tune it. Like, you know how you can be in a room full of noise and still hear the specific voice that says your name? It's like that. You learn which voices have your name and you let the rest go. What if none of them have my name and all of them are still there anyway? Then you practice your wall," Jean said, "until the wall is so natural you don't notice building it." She pushed his hair out of his face, it was doing its usual gravity-defying thing, worse than normal from him running his hands through it. "And you come to me. Immediately. Every time it's too much, you come to me. That's not weakness. That's sense. You always say that. Because it's always true." He leaned his head back against the bed. "I heard Mrs. McIntyre thinking about her grocery list on the 3rd floor, he said. It was very specific. There was a dispute about whether to get the good coffee or the regular coffee. And she's getting the good coffee. She just needed to argue with herself about it for a while first." Jean laughed, real and sudden, and the sound of it was so familiar and warm that Harry felt the jagged wall he'd built smooth out slightly, as if even the psychic architecture of him responded to her like a plant to light. "Good," he said. "I was rooting for the good coffee." By the time Harry was 10, he was something the Institute had not quite seen before and was in the process of figuring out how to describe. He was not the most powerful person in the building on any single metric. Charles was a stronger telepath, Jean was more precise with her telekinesis, Logan was faster in a physical fight, Aurora's weather control was on a scale that Harry's abilities didn't match yet. But Harry was the only person in the building whose abilities didn't fit into a category, and more than that, whose abilities operated across categories without friction, without the usual cost. He could do things that should require enormous effort with the casual ease of someone for whom effort was just another word for trying. He was also funny, increasingly, in the dry deadpan way of someone who had lived with Logan long enough for the humor to become structural. He was precise and patient in a way that irritated people who wanted him to be more demonstrably anxious about his own power. He was kind in a way that was never soft, it was a kind of kindness that had been forged in conditions where softness wasn't an option and so had come out harder, cleaner, more accurate. He was also still the kid who sat next to the pond and watched the ducks. Who had opinions about coffee? Who could spend 3 hours in a book and emerge with questions that made Charles set his cup down and think? He was, in short, very specifically himself, and the Institute had become very specifically his home, and the three people who formed the center of his world, Logan, Jean, and Charles, in descending order of physical availability and ascending order of conversations that made Harry's brain hurt in a good way, had each shaped something in him that the other two couldn't have. From Logan, the body's intelligence, the honesty of ground, the idea that power without willingness to use it was theater. From Jean, the mind's architecture, the ethics of what you did with what you could feel, the idea that care was not weakness but the sharpest tool available. From Charles, the long view, the patience of strategy, the idea that understanding your enemy was a form of not being afraid of them. He was 10 and he carried all of it, and he was still growing. Then the letters started. The first one arrived on a Tuesday, addressed in emerald green ink on yellowish parchment to Mr. H. Potter, The Yellow Room, 3rd floor, Xavier's Institute for Gifted Students, Westchester, New York, and it arrived not by the post but by owl, which landed on the kitchen windowsill at 7 in the morning and regarded Aurora with the profound indifference that owls brought to all situations. Harry was eating breakfast when Logan came in carrying it with the expression he used for objects he had not decided the threat level of yet. "This came for you," Logan said. Harry took the letter. He looked at it for a moment, the green ink, the wax seal on the back, the crest that meant nothing to him yet. He looked at the owl, which had accepted a piece of toast from Aurora and was consuming it without gratitude. He opened the letter. He read it once, quickly. Then again, slower. Then he set it down on the table and looked at it. "Well?" Logan said. "There's a school," Harry said. "A magic school. In Scotland. They want me to go." Logan sat down across from him. "Magic. That's what it says." "You do magic," Logan said, in the tone of a man reviewing a file he already had but needed to look at again in light of new information. "I do, something," Harry said. "Jean's not sure it's what this letter means." He tapped the parchment. "But whoever sent this is sure. They sent it here. To this room. By owl. They know about me and they know where I am." "Charles will want to know immediately," Logan said. "Charles already knows," said Charles, from the doorway, with his morning tea and the expression of a man who had been told approximately 45 seconds ago by Cerebro that something with a highly anomalous energy signature had arrived at the building. He looked at the letter on the table. Then at Harry. "It seems," he said, "that you have more than one world interested in you." Harry looked at the letter for another moment. Then he looked up and there was something in his eyes, not uncertainty, not anxiety, but the specific brightness of a person who had just been told there was a door they didn't know about, and the door was open. "When do I have to decide?" he asked. "That," Charles said, "is what we need to find out." Outside, the owl finished its toast, ruffled its feathers with enormous dignity, and departed through the window without a word. That night, Harry lay on his back on his bed with the letter on his chest and looked at the ceiling. He'd been in this room for 6 years. The yellow walls had faded slightly and he put things on the shelves, books, a geode Aurora had given him, a photograph of the 4 of them from last Christmas that Jean had framed without asking and put there one morning and he'd never moved it. The toy soldier was still on the nightstand. It would always be on the nightstand. He thought about the letter. About the school it described, the castle in Scotland, the curriculum, the things it promised to teach him. He thought about the other things he already was, the things the letter's senders didn't know and couldn't have accounted for, the fire in his hands, the voices he could hear and shut out, the bones that were not exactly bones, the something vast and warm that he shared with Jean and that had never, in 6 years, felt like anything other than home. He thought about who he was now versus who he might have been, who would have walked onto a train to that school at 11 without any of this inside him, without Logan's lessons and Jean's voice in the architecture of his walls and 6 years of being told, in every way a place could tell a person, "You are not wrong, you are not too much, you are exactly what you are and that is sufficient." He thought about that version of himself, small, careful, trained to make himself invisible, and felt something he could only describe as gratitude so complete it had no sharp edges. Then he thought, what's in Scotland? And he fell asleep smiling. Chapter 3, Letters on Fire. The second owl arrived on a Wednesday. The third on Thursday. By Friday there were 11 owls on the kitchen windowsill, all of them regarding the occupants of the Xavier Institute with the collective patience of creatures who had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to wait. Ororo had stopped being charmed by them around owl number 4 and was now regarding them with the careful neutrality of someone deciding whether weather was an appropriate response to a bird situation. "They're persistent," Harry said, eating his cereal. "That's one word," Logan said. "Determined," Harry offered. "Still not the word I'm using." Charles had spent the week making inquiries through channels Harry wasn't entirely privy to. There were, it turned out, people in Charles's address book who knew things about the magical world, contacts acquired over decades of mapping every variety of human and post-human ability, and Charles was methodical about his research in the same way tectonic plates were methodical about moving, quiet, enormous, and eventually definitive. By Friday evening he had called the household together in the study and laid out what he'd found. The school was real. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, established circa 993 AD, located in the Scottish Highlands behind more layers of concealment than Charles had ever encountered around a single physical location. The magical world was real, parallel to the mutant world in some ways, sealed off from it in others, with its own politics and history and a relationship to secrecy that made even the Xavier Institute's discretion look casual. And Harry, it turned out, was not just a student they were recruiting. He was a figure of specific significance to them. His parents, Charles said, looking at Harry. James and Lily Potter. They were not killed in a car accident. Harry set his cup down. They were killed by a man, a dark wizard. The records use the name Voldemort, 11 years ago. On the night they died, this man attempted to kill you as well. The killing curse he used, and it's called that deliberately, it has never failed, rebounded. He was destroyed. Or dispersed. The accounts vary. Charles paused. You survived. You survived in a way no one could explain, and you were left with a scar, and the magical world has been calling you the boy who lived ever since. The study was quiet. Harry's hand went to his forehead, to the lightning bolt scar he'd had his entire life, that Petunia had always told him was from the car crash and that he'd stopped thinking about because it had always been there and things that had always been there tended to become invisible. He touched it with 2 fingers. They think I survived because of some magic protection, he said, reading the shape of what Charles wasn't quite saying. They think your mother's sacrifice created a protection. And they're not wrong, exactly, but they don't know about the rest of it. Charles looked at him steadily. They don't know about you. What you've become. What's in you. How famous am I? Harry asked. In their world. Extremely, Jean said, from the corner. She'd been quiet since Charles started. Her arms were crossed and her expression was the one she wore when she was angry about something she was keeping level for Harry's sake. Famous enough that the headmaster of this school has been tracking your location since you were placed in that house in Surrey. He knew where I was, Harry said. Yes. He left me there anyway. A beat of silence. Yes, Jean said. Harry looked at the fire in the study hearth for a moment. Something moved in the fire, a flicker, a brightening, responding to a shift in the room that was not atmospheric. He looked at it, and it settled. Right, he said. So he had a plan for me. Almost certainly, Charles said. And the plan involves going to the school. Yes. You would receive proper magical education, which you do need, regardless of the rest. What you've been doing with your magic is intuitive and largely self-taught. There's an entire structured discipline of it that would, I want to go, Harry said. Logan made a sound. I want to go, Harry said again, looking at Logan directly, because it was Logan's sound specifically that he was addressing, because it's my world too, and I want to understand it. Not because anyone has a plan for me. I'm not going because some old man thinks I should. I'm going because I want to. He looked around the room. There's a difference. I know there's a difference, Logan said. That doesn't mean I like it. You don't have to like it, Harry said, with the particular affectionate directness he'd developed specifically for Logan, who responded poorly to tact and well to honesty. But it's mine. This part of what I am, it's mine, and I want to go look at it. Logan was quiet for a long moment. Then, we're going to Diagon Alley first. Obviously, Harry said. And I'm coming. I was counting on it. And if anyone, Logan, Jean said. I'm just saying, we know what you're saying, Jean said. We all know. We're going on Saturday. Diagon Alley was accessed through the back of a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which was in London, which meant they drove to the airport and Jean charmed the ticket agent into not noticing that Logan was not on any of the booking systems and they flew to Heathrow and took a taxi to Charing Cross Road. And through all of this Harry sat in the middle seat and looked out at everything with the expression of someone arriving somewhere they'd always known existed. The Leaky Cauldron was dark and smelled of something ancient, old wood, candle smoke, decades of spilled butterbeer, and it was full of people in robes who were having conversations that stopped when the three of them walked in. The stopping had less to do with Logan's presence, though Logan in a leather jacket with his arms crossed and his eyes moving over a room like a threat assessment did tend to produce pauses, and more to do with Harry. Harry didn't notice immediately, because he was looking at a man at the bar who appeared to be purchasing a cauldron and negotiating enthusiastically about its bottom gauge, which was a sentence that had never been a sentence in Harry's world before this moment. By the time he looked around and registered the staring, it had been going on for about 30 seconds. Why is everyone, he started. Your scar, Jean said quietly. Harry touched his forehead. Looked at the faces around the bar. Saw the recognition there, the specific, complicated recognition of people looking at a name made flesh, at a symbol they'd been carrying for 10 years. He lowered his hand. Okay, he said, and it was such a perfect compression of I understand, I don't love it, I'm going to continue anyway that Logan filed it without comment. Tom the barman, ancient and enthusiastic, nearly fell over himself crossing the room when he saw Harry, shaking his hand with both of his own, telling him what an honor and what a day and that his parents would have been so proud, and Harry received all of it with courtesy and warmth and zero performance, neither overwhelmed nor performing ease. He had spent years receiving information about himself that he hadn't asked for. He knew how to take it graciously without letting it move him from his footing. Logan watched this and felt something in his chest do a thing he wasn't going to describe. The brick wall in the courtyard out back accepted the correct sequence of taps from Tom's wand and opened, and Diagon Alley unfolded. Harry stopped at the entrance. It was, a lot. Even for someone raised in a building full of extraordinary people, it was a lot. The alley ran in a long, slightly crooked line between buildings that leaned over the street like they were discussing something, their signs swinging in no particular wind, their windows full of things that moved and glowed and behaved in ways that contradicted what Harry understood about how things behaved. Owls in cages. Telescopes that tracked nothing visible. A shop window full of what appeared to be moving portraits, the painted figures inside them waving with the specific enthusiasm of people who didn't get much company. Robes billowing everywhere. Conversations in undertones. The smell of something herbal and something else that had no name, something like old thunder. Well, Harry said. Yeah, Logan said, beside him. It's something. It's a lot of something. I like it, Harry said, and walked in. Gringotts Bank was a white building that made every other building on the street look like it was apologizing. The goblins at the entrance regarded them with the studied indifference of creatures who had been assessing humans for centuries and had stopped finding them particularly novel. Inside, at one of the high counters, a goblin named Griphook, who had been assigned to the Potter Vault and had apparently been waiting for this moment for several years with the patience of a creditor who knows the debt will eventually be paid, led them down through the tunnels in a cart that Logan spent the entire journey white-knuckling without comment. The vaults were extraordinary and Harry looked at them with great interest and no particular reverence. Money was, in his experience, a tool, and tools were things you understood and then used correctly. He asked Griphook several questions about the wizarding economy with the focused curiosity he brought to everything, and Griphook, who was not accustomed to being treated as an expert rather than a service provider, answered them with what might, on a goblin's face, have been satisfaction. The Potter vault was full. Extensively, historically full, in the way of wealth that was old enough to have forgotten its own origins. Harry looked at it for a moment, then looked at Griphook. "What's a reasonable budget for school supplies?" he asked. Griphook told him. "I'll take that," Harry said, "plus enough to establish a working fund at a reasonable exchange rate." "Can you arrange the exchange? I'm going to need regular access in both currencies." Griphook looked at him with something that might, on a goblin's face, have been respect. "Certainly, Mr. Potter." "Thank you," Harry said. He turned to Logan. "I want to come back here. There's something interesting about how they manage school supplies first," Logan said. "Right. Yes. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions was where things got interesting." Harry went in ahead of Jean and Logan, who remained by the door because Logan in a robe shop was a disruption nobody needed, and climbed onto the measuring stool and the automated measuring tape began doing its work, and Madame Malkin was pleasant and efficient and had him fitted for his measuring in about 4 minutes. There was another boy there, being fitted in the next stall, also school-aged, blonde and sharp-featured and carrying himself with the unconscious assurance of someone who had grown up in rooms where they were always the most important person present. He looked at Harry with the assessment of someone doing a social calculation. "Hogwarts," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Me too. First year." He was looking at Harry's scar, though he was trying to be subtle about it and wasn't succeeding. You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. The boy smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just recalculated the value of the conversation upward. "Draco Malfoy," he said. "I've heard about you, of course. Everyone has." He said it in a way that indicated he expected this to be significant to Harry, expected Harry to feel the weight of that of course and find it flattering or at least impressive. Harry nodded pleasantly. "Hello. You'll want to know," Draco continued, with the air of someone dispensing necessary advice to a less informed party, "which families are worth knowing at Hogwarts. Which ones aren't?" He glanced toward the door, where Logan was visible through the glass, arms crossed, watching. Something flickered in Draco's expression. "Is that a friend?" Harry said. "He looks like a friend," Harry said again, with the same tone, which was not unkind but was absolutely final. Draco refocused. "The thing is, Potter, at Hogwarts there are people you want to be associated with and people you, well." He seemed to be offering something, though it was the kind of offer that was designed to feel like a gift while operating as an audition. "I could help you navigate it." Harry looked at him for a moment. Draco was, not unintelligent, not even unkind in any deep sense. Harry could feel the edges of his mind well enough to tell that much. He was a boy who had been very specifically shaped by his upbringing into a set of assumptions that he held as facts, and among those assumptions was that hierarchy was natural and he belonged near the top of it. "I'll manage," Harry said pleasantly. "But thank you." Something shifted in Draco's expression. Not quite offense, more the recalibration of someone who'd been certain about the social current and found that it wasn't running the direction they'd expected. The door opened. Not Logan. A large man came in, adult, well-dressed in a way that announced wealth with the aggressiveness of someone who needed the announcement, blonde like the boy, with a cane that was ornamental rather than structural and a face that wore authority the way a mask wore a face. "Draco," the man said, and then his eyes moved to Harry and the calculation in them was immediate and extremely readable to anyone with a working ability to read minds, which Harry had. He saw it very clearly, the recognition, the assessment, the layering of plans the man was already running. Mr. Potter, Lucius Malfoy said. I had heard you'd finally entered our world. Your mother and father were, don't, Harry said. The word came out entirely level. Not rude. Not hot. Just a boundary as clear as a wall. Lucius blinked. I beg your pardon. You were going to say something about my parents that was designed to establish your relationship to them as a credential, Harry said, still level, stepping down from the measuring stool. You don't have one. And if you did, I don't need it. He picked up the list from the counter. Thank you, Madam Malkin. He walked to the door. Behind him, he heard Lucius Malfoy begin to say something, the tone of it already sharpening, the particular vocalization of a man who was not accustomed to being addressed this way by someone in small clothes holding a school supply list, and then he heard the door open and Logan step inside, and the change in the room's temperature was not meteorological. Problem? Logan said. The silence from the Malfoys lasted about 3 seconds. No problem, Lucius said. The sharpness had left his voice with remarkable speed. Whatever he'd registered in Logan, the specific quality of him, the way he stood, the eyes, had performed the calculation and arrived at not today. Good, Logan said. He looked at Harry. Wand shop next. Ollivanders, Harry confirmed, consulting the list. They walked out onto the alley together, Jean falling into step on Harry's other side. You were fantastic in there, Jean said quietly. He was going to pretend he knew my parents, Harry said. I know. People do that. Like knowing their name means something about me. It doesn't, Jean said. What matters is what you build. Harry looked at the alley around them, the bustle and strangeness of it, the robed figures, the shops full of extraordinary things, and felt something click into place inside him that he hadn't known was waiting to click. Not belonging, exactly. Something more specific than that. Recognition. The sense of, this is also mine. Wands, he said. Let's go. Ollivanders was narrow and dim and smelled of sawdust and something older, and the man behind the counter emerged from the shadows with the quality of a person who had been present in this shop since before the shop itself had decided on its final form. He was pale, with wide silver eyes that had been seeing things for long enough that they had developed a particular kind of depth, not wisdom, exactly, but the depth of an enormous amount of observed information. He looked at Harry and his eyes went to the scar and then past it, which was not what most people did and which Harry noticed and marked. Harry Potter, Ollivander said. It wasn't quite a greeting. More like the completion of a thought he'd been having for 10 years. That's me, Harry said. I wondered, Ollivander said, when you'd come in. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. I remember your parents' wands. Your father, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. Your mother, he paused, and something genuine moved in his expression, willow, 10 1/4, swishy, wonderful for charms work. She was extraordinary. Harry looked at him. You said I'd come in. You knew I was alive. I knew you were alive, Ollivander agreed, without apology or deflection. He was a man who had long ago decided that accuracy was more important than comfort. What I didn't know, he said, moving toward Harry with a measuring tape that was already working independently of anyone's hands, was what you'd become. The silver eyes moved over him, not just the scar, not just the surface. Ollivander had, Harry sensed, some version of the ability to perceive what was in a person. Not telepathy. Something more specific, tuned to the particular resonance of magical potential. The man went very still. I see, he said quietly. What do you see? Harry asked. Something I've never fitted a wand to before. He turned and began moving through the shelves with sudden decisiveness. This is going to be interesting. The next 40 minutes were, genuinely, interesting. Wand after wand, Ollivander moved through them with methodical speed, and each time Harry took one in his hand he could feel the diagnostic quality of the thing, the wand reaching out and finding the shape of him and then receding when the shape didn't fit. Some of them sparked or shook or did nothing at all. One sent a jet of water across the room, which soaked Logan's jacket and produced a look that made Ollivander move to the next one very quickly. And then Ollivander brought out a box from a shelf so high he needed a ladder, a shelf in the back that was clearly not the shelf he normally accessed, and he set it on the counter and opened it. The wand inside was unusual. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple, nothing about the description was unusual. But the feather was not from a conventional phoenix. Ollivander had acquired it decades ago from a source he was not specific about and had never found the right owner for it and had long since stopped showing it to customers because no one responded to it. Harry picked it up. The warmth was immediate. Not the warmth of a fit, not the specific warm spark of a matching wand. Harry had felt that half a dozen times in the last 40 minutes. This was different. This was the warmth he knew, the deep gold warmth of the phoenix that was also in him, and the wand did not light up or shower sparks or do any of the conventional theatrics of a proper match. It simply settled in his hand like it had always been there. "Oh," Ollivander said softly. "What kind of phoenix feather?" Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him. "The other wand with this phoenix's feather," he said, "is the wand that gave you that scar." The shop was quiet. Harry felt the wand in his hand. Felt the warmth of it, which was entirely his warmth, entirely the warmth of the thing in him that was ancient and patient and did not feel like Voldemort's wand and never had. "Brothers," Ollivander said. "In the sense that they share a core." "In the sense that they share a source," Harry said, "not in the sense that they're the same." Ollivander looked at him steadily. "No," he said. "Not the same. Nothing like the same." He paused. 7 galleons, Mr. Potter." Harry paid him. He picked up the wand box and held it and felt the warmth in his palm like a conversation that had just started. Outside, Logan and Jean were waiting. Logan looked at the box. "That's it?" "That's it," Harry said. "Did anything weird happen?" "Several things." "Good weird or bad weird?" Harry looked at the wand box for a moment. The sunlight on Diagon Alley was going amber in the afternoon, turning everything gold. "Mine weird," he said. "Just mine." They had lunch at a small wizarding cafe that Logan spent approximately 3 minutes in before relocating to the street outside because the noise level and density of people doing things that contradicted physics made the small muscle near his eye do a thing Jean called the Logan twitch. Harry and Jean sat at a small table and ate something called pumpkin pasties and talked, and Harry asked Jean questions about the magical world with the focused appetite of someone consuming a map. "You're not nervous," Jean said. "Not a question." "About what?" "Any of it." "Hogwarts. Being the boy who lived to people who've never met you." "Voldemort." She paused. "The headmaster who left you in that cupboard." Harry considered this while eating. "Voldemort's something I'll deal with when it's in front of me." "He's not in front of me yet." He took another bite. "The school thing is interesting. I want to go and learn the things I don't know yet." "And Dumbledore?" "He had a plan for me," Harry said. "Now I have a plan for me." "Those are probably different plans." He shrugged. "I'll find out." Jean looked at him. "You know I'm not sending you in there alone." "I know. Charles is going to make contact with the school. Establish some kind of, Jean," Harry said. She stopped. "I know," he said again, and smiled at her, and it was the real one, the sudden one, the light switch one. "I know. You and Logan and Charles are, I know. You're not going anywhere and neither am I." He paused. "But I also get to go find out what I am." "All of it." "Both sides." Jean held his gaze for a moment, and behind her eyes something moved that was hers and also not entirely hers, the phoenix warmth that they shared, reaching across the table between them. She reached back. Both sides, she agreed. It was on the way back through the leaky cauldron that the second Malfoy incident occurred. Lucius had not left when they had. He was at the bar with two other men who wore the particular look of people whose confidence had always been structural rather than earned, and he looked up when they came in, and the look he gave Harry carried something specific in it, not the earlier calculation, something more deliberate. He said something to the men with him, something low that Harry caught the edge of through the noise. Half-blood. Raised by muggles. Doesn't know what he is yet. Harry stopped walking. Logan stopped with him, because Logan always stopped with him, had an instinct for it that was almost independent of awareness. Harry turned and looked at Lucius Malfoy across the room. The bar was busy, but something about the quality of his attention cut through the noise, and Lucius felt it and looked up and met his eyes. What Lucius saw made him very still. Not anger. Anger was a hot thing, reactive, and Harry's expression was neither. It was the expression of someone who had assessed a situation and found it precisely as significant as it deserved to be, which was, not very. My parents are worth more than your entire bloodline's opinion of them, Harry said, in the conversational tone he would have used to correct a factual error in an essay. And I know exactly what I am. You should probably know that before you decide on a course of action. The bar was not entirely quiet, but the people close enough to hear were. Lucius's hand moved toward his cane, toward the wand in it, not dramatically, but the movement was there. Logan's hand went to Lucius's wrist. Not hard. He didn't need hard. Just, there. Fingers around the wrist, completely still, and the pressure was not violent but was entirely unambiguous about what violence was available. Don't, Logan said. Lucius looked at Logan's hand on his wrist. Then at Logan's face. Then, in the space of about 2 seconds, he performed the same calculation he performed in Madame Malkin's and arrived at the same answer. He did not draw the wand. Logan released him. Good day, Harry said to Lucius, pleasantly, and walked to the door. Outside on Charing Cross Road, Jean let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You are going to give me grey hairs, she said. You already have a bit of grey, Harry said, looking up at her. Harry. It looks good, he said earnestly. You're 11. Almost 11. Almost 11, she agreed. Logan came out behind them, hands in pockets. He did not say what he was thinking about Harry's performance in the leaky cauldron, which was that it was the most Logan thing he'd ever seen that wasn't actually Logan, and he filed it in a very crowded place. Bookshop next time, Harry said, looking back toward the alley. I barely had time to look at Flourish and Blots. There was a section on, not today, Logan said. But, there is a limit, Logan said, to how many buildings I can stand in where the books are also sentient. They weren't sentient, they were just enchanted. Same thing. It's really not, Harry said. But he was smiling, and Jean was smiling, and even Logan's expression, as they walked up Charing Cross Road toward the taxi rank in the late afternoon London light, had done the thing it sometimes did, the thing that made him look briefly, entirely, human. The letter to Hogwarts went back that night. Harry wrote it himself, at the kitchen table, with Aurora's tea being made behind him and Logan at the other end of the table reading something about motorcycle engines and the particular comfortable silence of home settling around everything. He wrote that he accepted the place. He wrote that he had conditions, not requests, conditions, regarding the terms of his enrollment, and that the Xavier Institute maintained interest in his welfare as a student. He wrote that he expected to be treated as a student, not as a symbol. He wrote it in clear, direct, unsentimental language with the elegant handwriting that Jean had, years ago, sat with him 3 afternoons a week until he had it, on the basis that the quality of your writing communicated the quality of your thinking to people who hadn't met you yet. He sealed it. He called the owl, there were still 3 of them on the windowsill by now, in a state of torpid patience, and attached the letter and sent it back out into the dark. Then he looked at his hands on the table. Looked at the warmth in them, just below the surface, the fire that was always there and always his. Logan, he said. Do you think I'll be good at it? The magic part? Logan turned a page of his magazine without looking up. Kid, he said, I watched you make it rain inside the training room because you were annoyed about a transfiguration problem. I watched you have a 30-minute conversation with a tree. Last week you fixed the boiler by putting your hand on it and concentrating. That was Jean. That was you and Jean. There's a difference. Harry looked at his hands. Yeah, Logan said. I think you'll be fine. Outside, the owl carrying Harry Potter's acceptance letter lifted from the windowsill and flew north, into the autumn dark, toward Scotland. Somewhere up there, in a castle behind more layers of protection than any building had a right to, an old man with a long beard and complicated plans was about to read something that would make him sit very still for a very long time. Harry didn't think about that. He thought about the fire in his hands, and the wand upstairs in its box, and the school in Scotland that was full of his magic, the magic that had been waiting in him his whole life, and he thought, I'm coming for all of it. Then he went to bed. Chapter 4, The Sorting of Something New. The Hogwarts Express left from platform 9 3/4, which was accessed by walking through a solid brick wall, which Harry did without breaking stride while Logan stood on the other side of it looking at the wall for a moment before following. Jean had come to King's Cross. She stood on the platform in the noise and steam and the organized chaos of families saying goodbye, and she looked at Harry with the expression she reserved for moments when she had decided to be practical instead of emotional, which meant she was extremely emotional. You have the communication mirror, she said. Top of my trunk. And you know how to use the, Jean. I know. She put her hands on his shoulders. He was not quite as small as he'd been, 11 was treating him better than 4 through 10, or the eating was finally catching up properly, or both, but he was still compact, still built like someone who'd been designed to move rather than to take up space. He looked up at her with those eyes that were ridiculously green in the morning light. You're going to be extraordinary. I'm already extraordinary, he said, and grinned, and it was the real one, and she laughed in spite of herself. You are, she agreed. Come back for Christmas. I'll come back before that if anything interesting happens. Everything interesting will happen, she said. That's not a reason to leave early. Logan, standing slightly apart, said nothing. He looked at Harry with the flat, thorough assessment of someone conducting a final check of something they'd spent years building. Harry met his eyes. I know, Harry said. I didn't say anything, Logan said. You were about to say several things. They were good things. I know that too, Harry said. Logan put one hand briefly on top of Harry's head, not a ruffle, nothing so soft as that, just a solid contact, a placement of hand to skull that communicated something that neither of them would have been able to say in a sentence, and then withdrew it. Go, he said. Harry picked up his trunk, his owl cage, inside which Hedwig, a snowy owl he'd bought at Elop's, was regarding the departure with supreme indifference, and walked toward the train. He looked back once. Jean was standing with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes very bright. Logan was standing with his hands in his pockets and his expression doing the complicated thing it did when he was refusing to show what was on it. Harry raised his hand. They both raised theirs. He turned and stepped onto the train. He found an empty compartment toward the back of the train and loaded his trunk into the overhead rack and set Hedwig's cage on the seat and sat down and looked out the window as London began to slide away and become first the city's edges and then countryside, the particular English countryside that was already going amber gold with early October. He was alone for approximately 8 minutes. The door slid open and a girl came in, bushy brown hair, slightly too many books visible in the bag slung over her shoulder, eyes that were cataloging the compartment and its occupant with the focused efficiency of someone running assessments. She saw Harry and then looked at the rest of the compartment and said, "Is this space taken?" "No," Harry said. "Come in." She came in, stowed her bag with brisk competence, and sat down across from him. She looked at him again and then looked at his forehead and then looked away with the specific deliberateness of someone who had noticed something and decided to be polite about it, which Harry appreciated more than she could have known. "Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry Potter." "I know," she said. Then, immediately, "Sorry, I didn't mean that in a, it's fine," Harry said. "You said it the same way I'd say I know. Like a fact." She looked at him for a moment, recalibrating. "Yes. Exactly." She seemed to decide something. "I've read about you. In modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and, what do the books say? That you survived the killing curse when you were 1 year old because of your mother's protective sacrifice, and that Voldemort," she said the name without hesitation, which Harry noted and liked immediately, "was destroyed or at least dispersed, and that you're considered the reason the war ended. They call you the boy who lived." She paused. "You don't look like a symbol." "I'm not," Harry said. "I'm a person." "Obviously," Hermione said, and it was so complete a statement of the self-evident that Harry smiled. "What house do you want?" he asked. "Gryffindor," she said immediately. "My parents are Muggles, they don't know much about the houses, but I've read everything and Gryffindor has the best academic record alongside Ravenclaw, and the Gryffindor values align more with," she stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that." "Don't stop," Harry said. "What are the values?" She looked at him, checking for condescension. "Found none. Bravery. Nerve. Chivalry." She paused. "I'm not sure I'm brave." "You said Voldemort's name on a train full of children who've been conditioned not to," Harry said. "You're brave." Hermione Granger looked at Harry Potter, and whatever she found in his expression, she sat back slightly, and some quality of tenseness in her went away, and from that point the conversation became something else, real, interested, two people genuinely talking to each other rather than performing first contact. They talked through Yorkshire. Harry found out that Hermione had read every Hogwarts textbook twice already and had opinions about the methodology of several of the professors based solely on their published work, and that she was lonely in a way she had intellectualized into something manageable, and that she was genuinely interested in everything and had no idea what to do with that, and that she had a laugh that arrived suddenly and was over quickly and was entirely unself-conscious and excellent. Hermione found out that Harry had grown up in New York, which surprised her enormously, and that he'd been raised by people who were also not magical, and that he'd been doing intuitive magic his whole life, and that he had other abilities that he described without particular elaboration as significant and complicated, and Hermione to her credit did not push for specifics but simply absorbed the information and moved on. "What house do you think you'll be in?" she asked. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "I grew up outside the system. I don't know where I fit." "Where do you want to fit?" He looked out the window. The north was coming up now, the landscape opening, going bigger and greener. "Somewhere I can learn," he said. "And somewhere no one expects me to be a symbol." "That might not be any of them," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed. "Probably not. But we'll see." The compartment door slid open again. This time a round-faced boy leaned in with an expression of cautious hope, moon face, slightly lost quality, the manner of someone who had been mislaid and was hoping to be found without incident. "Sorry," he said, "has anyone seen a toad?" "I've lost mine." "No," Harry said. "But come in if you want. We'll help you look when the trolley's been." The boy, Neville Longbottom, who turned out to have his own complicated relationship with expectation and destiny, though he hadn't articulated it yet, sat down, and Hedwig chose this moment to express an opinion about the proceedings, and somehow the three of them were laughing before the trolley arrived, which Harry thought was probably the best way to start a school year. Hogwarts arrived at night, across the lake in small boats, and it arrived the way things you've been told about your whole life arrived when you finally see them in person, larger than described, more specific, more strange and more real. Harry sat in the boat with Hermione on one side and Neville on the other and looked at the castle rising from the rock above the black water, and the 1,000 windows lit from within, and the towers and turrets that made architectural sense in a different logic than any logic he'd been taught. He felt it. Not saw, felt. The magic of the place, the centuries of it, the accumulation, the way the castle itself was alive with something old and deliberate and aware. It reached out toward him and he felt the warmth in his hands respond, a resonance between what was in him and what was in the castle's stones. "You feel that?" he asked Hermione quietly. She looked at him. "Feel what?" "The castle." She looked at it. "I don't, I feel something. Like pressure behind my eyes. Like standing in a very loud room except there's no noise." "That's it," Harry said. "That's it exactly." Neville had gone slightly green from the boat's motion and was not feeling metaphysical things about the castle at this moment, but he gripped the side of the boat with great determination and did not fall in, which Harry thought showed character. The Great Hall was another thing described and then exceeded. For long tables running the length of it, thousands of candles floating, the ceiling showing the night sky outside, Harry looked up at it immediately, recognized the stars, found them correctly positioned for October and felt a small satisfaction in the confirmation. The older students were all turned in their seats looking at the first years filing in, and the looking had different textures, curious, appraising, competitive, nostalgic, and in several cases the specific texture of "I know that face" when they landed on Harry. Harry looked back at all of them with equal openness and kept walking. Professor McGonagall was exactly what she looked like she'd be, a woman who had decided on her standards some decades ago and had not encountered a compelling argument for revising them since. She addressed the first years with the economy of someone who had explained the procedure 400 times and had not softened her delivery in any of those 400 iterations, and Harry listened carefully because the information was genuinely interesting. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool on a battered wooden hat and it was, manifestly, alive in some sense, and when it opened its brim and began to sing Harry felt a spike of genuine delight, not the performance of delight, the real thing, because the hat was, in effect, a telepathic artifact with 1,000 years of pattern recognition, and that was extraordinary by any standard. The sorting went through the alphabet and he watched and listened and catalogued. Hermione went to Gryffindor, the hat barely touched her head before making the call, and she walked to the table with the specific relief of someone who had bet right on an important thing. Neville went to Gryffindor as well, after a pause that was longer than most and that Harry suspected had more going on in it than the outside observer could see. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall did the thing halls did when a name arrived with weight. The silence was different, denser, attended, the silence of a room full of people redirecting attention at once. Harry walked to the stool, picked up the hat, and put it on. The voice arrived inside his head immediately. Not Jean's warmth, not Charles's precision, something older and more impersonal and very, very curious. "Well," said the Sorting Hat. "That's unusual." "I've been told," Harry said. You have several things in here that I haven't encountered in." The hat was quiet for a moment in the way of something genuinely processing. 1,000 years. I haven't encountered this in 1,000 years. There are multiple, just tell me where I belong, Harry said, not unkindly. That's the thing, Mr. Potter. You belong in all of them. There is bravery here that is, considerable. And intelligence that is, I need a moment. Take your time. Cunning. You have it. The willingness to use any available resource, the long view, the strategic patience. Ambition, not for status, but for understanding, which is the most dangerous kind. And a loyalty, the hat paused again, and the pause had weight, a loyalty so thorough it's structural. It's not something you chose. It's something that was built into you by people who, yes, Harry said. He didn't need it elaborated. Where do you want to go? Somewhere I can learn everything, Harry said. And somewhere where they'll let me. The hat was quiet for a long moment. Harry could feel the hall waiting, could feel it as a physical thing, the attention of 600 people pressing on him like weather. You know, the hat said, and there was something in its voice that was very old and slightly amused, you're the first student in 400 years who's made the sorting difficult by genuinely fitting the criteria for all four. Usually when they fit multiple it's because they have 2 strong qualities and 2 weak ones and I weight them. You have all 4 fully. You could put me in too, Harry said. That's not how this works. It could be. Mr. Potter. I'm just noting, I'm going to put you in Gryffindor, the Hat said, with the finality of someone who has made a decision and is shutting down further negotiation, because your bravery is the quality most likely to shape what you do with the rest of it. Also because those are your people and we both know it. Fair enough. Gryffindor, the Hat shouted. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between assessment and recognition, and walked to the Gryffindor table. Hermione moved over immediately to make space. Neville grinned. Several older students leaned in with varying degrees of composure. One of the Weasley twins said something about fame that was meant to be cutting and came out merely as evidence that Harry wasn't reacting the way they expected, which interested them enough to become a conversation instead of a performance. Harry sat down and looked at the hall and felt the castle's warmth around him and thought, all right. Let's see what this is. Potions was first on Thursday, and Snape was something Harry had not quite prepared for. He had prepared for many things. He had prepared for the celebrity problem, which manifested immediately and which he handled with a combination of courtesy and absolute refusal to perform gratitude for being recognized. He had prepared for the curriculum gap. There were things the other students had grown up knowing that he didn't, idioms and references and cultural textures of the wizarding world that he'd had to look up or simply admit ignorance of, which he did without embarrassment because embarrassment about not knowing something you hadn't had the opportunity to learn was illogical. He had prepared for the complexity of living in the castle, which was large and alive and full of portraits and staircases that changed their minds and a caretaker named Filch who seemed to be conducting a private war against the concept of students and took it personally. He had not prepared for Snape. Snape swept in with the black robes and the contained velocity of someone perpetually moving between fury and precision, and he began the class with a roll call that arrived at Harry's name and stopped. "Ah," Snape said. "Harry Potter." He said it the way people said names that were also judgments, the name of something that had been disappointing before it arrived. "Our new celebrity." The class went very still. This was a thing, Harry registered, that Snape did deliberately, used the still air like an instrument. "I'm Harry," Harry said. "Potter is fine too." "Either one." Snape looked at him. The look was designed to establish something, the specific teacher gaze that communicated hierarchy through eye contact alone. Harry returned it with the mild, interested attention he gave to everything, which was not defiant in any performed sense but was also categorically not intimidated. Snape proceeded to ask questions. Specifically, Snape proceeded to ask questions that were designed to be unanswerable by first years, phrased in a way that framed ignorance as failure rather than simply the current state of knowledge. "Potter," he said. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The class was quiet. Harry looked at the question. He had, in fact, read the potions textbook, all the textbooks, because he was Jean Grey's son in every way that mattered and Jean Grey's relationship to incomplete preparation was pathological. He knew the answer. "The Draught of Living Death," Harry said. "It's one of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The name is technically a misnomer because the consumer isn't dead, but the depth of the unconsciousness is sufficient that diagnosis is genuinely difficult without magical testing." Snape looked at him. "Where would you find a Bezoar?" Snape said, pivoting immediately, the velocity of someone who has moved their attack rather than abandoned it. "In the stomach of a goat," Harry said. "It counteracts most poisons. There are 6 known poisons it doesn't work against, which are documented in Arsenius Jigger's supplementary notes to the main text." Another pause. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "There is no difference," Harry said. "They're the same plant. Also called aconite. It's in the nightshade family. The relevant thing about it for this class is probably that it's used in the wolfsbane potion, which manages lycanthropy symptoms, though the preparation is complex enough that most people need a specialist to brew it correctly. Snape regarded him for a long moment. The class was very still. Something moved in Snape's expression, not warmth, nothing so generous as that, but the slight recalibration of someone who has aimed a weapon and found the target unexpectedly armored. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, in the tone of a man making a concession under duress. Do not, he added, with the velocity returning, assume this constitutes approval, Mr. Potter. In this classroom, what matters is not what you know but what you can do. Knowing the draft of living death is not the same as brewing it. I know, Harry said. That's why I'm here. From 2 seats away, Hermione was looking at Harry with an expression that suggested she had found something rare and was recalibrating her opinion of the term ahead. The troll happened on Halloween. There was a feast, an exceptional one, the kind that demonstrated what magic actually looked like when it was applied to the problem of celebration, and Harry was eating and talking to Hermione about the difference between charms theory and practice, and Neville was explaining something about herbology with more confidence than he usually had about anything when Professor Quirrell came in. Harry had been watching Quirrell since the first week. There was something wrong about him. Not wrong in any single definable way, the stutter, the nervous quality, the turban that no one else thought much about, but in Harry's experience, things that felt wrong usually were wrong, and Quirrell felt wrong the way a room felt wrong after someone had moved the furniture slightly and not told you. His mind had a texture that Harry could feel from across a room, something compressed and layered and deliberately inaccessible, which was itself interesting because most people's minds didn't need that level of management unless there was something doing the managing. He'd mentioned it to Jean in the communication mirror the previous Sunday. She'd said, keep watching, tell me if it develops, trust your read. He was trusting his read. Quirrell came in during the feast and announced there was a troll in the dungeons and then fainted, which was structurally interesting as a piece of crisis communication. The hall erupted. Prefects were directing students back to dormitories, teachers were moving toward the dungeon, Dumbledore's voice was somewhere overhead being authoritative about something, and Harry was already thinking, Hermione. Hermione had left the feast earlier, he'd clocked it peripherally while they were talking, after an interaction with Ron Weasley that Harry had witnessed and found irritating in its pettiness. She'd been upset and she'd gone to the girls' bathroom and she didn't know about the troll because she'd been in there since before Quirrell's announcement. Hermione's in the bathroom, Harry said to Neville. What? She doesn't know. She left before Quirrell came in. He was already standing. I'm going. Harry, come if you want, Harry said, and went. Neville came. This said something about Neville that Harry filed away as significant. They went against the flow of students and found the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor and could hear the troll before they reached it, 12 feet of dense stupidity and genuine destructive power, the smell of it like something that had been left in the sun too long and then given opinions. Harry opened the bathroom door. The troll had cornered Hermione against the far wall and she was backed into a sink and she was not screaming but her face was white and her eyes were doing the rapid calculation of someone who had run the numbers and found them unhelpful. The troll swung its club. Harry caught it. Not with his hands, he put his hand up and the club stopped, and there was a flare of gold light, brief and fierce, and the force of the troll's swing traveled nowhere. The troll stared at its arrested club with the specific dim outrage of something that had never had a stopped thing before. Go, Harry said to Hermione. To the side of his vision, Neville, get her out. What are you going to? The troll pulled its club back and Harry let it go and the force of the rebound staggered the creature 2 steps backward. Harry stepped forward into the space this created and looked up at the troll. You're not going to win this, he told it, conversationally. The troll had no interest in information. It swung again. Harry moved, the movement Logan had spent years teaching him, not sideways, through, ducking inside the arc of the club and coming up close to the troll's torso, and he put his hand flat against its chest and pushed, and the push was not physical in any conventional sense. The warmth in his hands went outward, the phoenix fire channeled through intent the way Jean had taught him to channel telepathy, directed, specific, purposeful. The troll went backward. Not violently, controlled, like something being moved rather than something being hit, and met the far wall with enough force to sit down hard against it and stay sitting, dazed, the club on the floor. Harry stood in the middle of the bathroom. Hermione was in the doorway behind him. She had not left. "I told you to go," Harry said. "I wasn't going to," she stopped. Her eyes moved from Harry to the troll, which was sitting against the wall with the expression of something whose whole project had just been revised. "You stopped the club," she said. "Yes." "With your hand?" "Yes." "How?" "Long answer," Harry said. "Short version is, I have abilities outside of conventional magic." He looked at her. "I'll explain properly later. Are you okay?" She took inventory. "Yes. I'm okay." Neville, from behind Hermione, said, "That was extremely, I don't have the word." "I'll accept the concept," Harry said. The teachers arrived 30 seconds later, McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell, who came in last and looked at the sitting, dazed troll and then at Harry with the specific attention of someone who is cataloguing information for a purpose that is not immediately apparent. Harry looked back at Quirrell, just for a moment. The wrongness was louder up close. McGonagall took points from all three of them for being out of their dormitory and then gave them back plus more for dealing with the troll, which Harry understood as her particular form of communication, the rules matter and you were right to do what you did, and which he respected. She also looked at him, during the point ceremony, with the same expression she'd had when he'd taken off the sorting hat, assessment and recognition. "How," she said quietly, when Hermione and Neville were ahead of them on the way back, "did you stop the club?" "I have abilities beyond my wand," Harry said. "I was going to speak to you and the headmaster about them this week." "What kind of abilities?" "The kind that are mine," Harry said, not evasive, just precise. "I'd rather explain them once and explain them fully. The headmaster will want to know anyway." McGonagall looked at him. The expression resolved into something definite. "Friday," she said. "After dinner." "Friday works," Harry said. The meeting with Dumbledore was on a Friday, in an office that was everything Harry had expected and also more of it, the portraits, the whirring silver instruments, the phoenix on the perch, and the headmaster himself. Albus Dumbledore was extraordinary. Harry registered this immediately and also registered that it was exactly the point, that the extraordinariness was itself a communication, a stage set, and the man behind it was making a series of calculations that had begun approximately 9 years ago. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with warmth that was genuine and also deployed. "Please sit down." Harry sat. "I must say," Dumbledore said, looking at him with those eyes that were doing something Harry's telepathy could feel without fully reading, deep shielding, ancient and practiced, "you are rather different from what I expected." "Different from what you planned," Harry said. A pause. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. "I planned," he said, gently. "You left me in that house knowing what it was," Harry said. "Not carelessly. You had reasons. I'm not angry about it, I'm past that. I just want to be clear that I understand the shape of the situation so we can have an honest conversation." He looked at the old man steadily. "You had a plan for who I'd be when I got here. I'm something different." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The twinkle, the famous twinkle, was absent, replaced by something more genuine and less charming. "Who raised you?" he said. "Jean Grey. Logan. Charles Xavier. You know this." "I know the names. I know the Institute." "What I didn't know," Dumbledore said, and something in his voice was real, something had dropped, was what they'd build. He leaned forward slightly. "You are not what I expected, Harry. And I'm not certain my plan accounts for you as you are." "It doesn't," Harry said. "Not unkindly. So we should make a new one." McGonagall, sitting to the side, made a sound that was almost nothing and was almost a laugh. "You're 11, Dumbledore said. "Almost 12, Harry said. And I have adamantium in my bones, phoenix fire in my hands, a functional telepathy, a wand connected to Voldemort's, and 6 years of training from people who deal with existential threats professionally. He paused. I'm not telling you this to be impressive. I'm telling you so you know what the actual board looks like before we start playing. The fire crackled. Fawkes, on his perch, turned his head and looked at Harry with the specific attention of something recognizing something. Harry looked back. The warmth in his hands rose gently, naturally, and Fawkes made a sound, a single pure note, that landed in the room like something significant. Dumbledore looked at his phoenix. Then at Harry. Perhaps, he said slowly, we do need a new plan. I'll help, Harry said. On my terms. And what are your terms? You tell me the truth, Harry said. All of it. What Voldemort wants. What the prophecy says. What you thought was going to happen and what the actual options are. He looked at the headmaster. I'm not a chess piece. I'll work with you, genuinely, I'll work with you, but not in the dark. Not again. The office was quiet. Then Albus Dumbledore, who had been managing things for 60 years and had not been talked to like this by anyone in most of them, leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and then back at Harry, and something moved in his face that might have been relief. Very well, he said. Good, Harry said. Start with the Philosopher's Stone. Dumbledore blinked. It's in the school, Harry said. In the third-floor corridor, which you told everyone not to go near, which is exactly how you'd announce something was there to any student paying attention. Something is protecting it and whoever wants it is already here. He paused. It's the man with the turban. The silence was very thorough. How long have you known? Dumbledore said. Since the first week, Harry said. His mind is wrong. Layered. Something is in him that doesn't belong there. He looked at Dumbledore. That's Voldemort, isn't it? Yes, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Right, Harry said. So. Tell me everything. He wrote to Jean that night. Not in the communication mirror, something with this much content wanted a letter, wanted the care of written words. He told her about Dumbledore and the stone and Quirrell and the plan. He told her about Hermione and Neville. He told her the castle felt right in the way the Institute felt right and he was learning things he didn't know he needed and it was good, genuinely good. He told her he missed her. He didn't frame it as a complaint. Just a fact, clean and direct, because Jean had always been worth being direct with. He sealed the letter, gave it to Hedwig, and watched her lift off from the window tower into the cold clear November night and turn south, finding the updraft, arrow straight, going home. Chapter 5, The Man with Two Faces. December came to Hogwarts the way December came to old things, slowly, settling into the stones, finding every gap in the windows and every unguarded corridor, turning the lake to black glass and the grounds to white silence. Harry liked it. There was a clarity to the cold that suited him, a sharpening of the air that made thinking feel more precise. He had been thinking a great deal. The conversation with Dumbledore had opened several things that Harry was now turning over with the patience Logan had taught him, not rushing toward conclusions, not acting on incomplete information, just watching and building the picture. Dumbledore had told him about the stone. About Nicholas Flamel, about the protections in the third-floor corridor, about the fact that he believed Quirrell was being used as a vessel by something that was not quite Voldemort but was a version of him, a remnant, a fragment, a thing that had survived its own destruction by attaching itself to a host. Can it be destroyed? Harry had asked. The fragment? Possibly. The question is how, and at what cost to the host. Quirrell. Yes. Harry had sat with this. You weren't going to tell the other teachers. Not all of them, no. I have reasons, Snape, Harry said. Another pause. Dumbledore's pauses were information. Harry had learned to read them. Severus is complicated, Dumbledore said. He is, Harry agreed, but he's not working for Voldemort. Whatever he's doing when he's being unpleasant, it's coming from somewhere personal, not somewhere political. He'd felt it often enough in potions, the specific texture of Snape's discomfort when Harry's name came up, old and raw and buried under precision and acidity. He hated my father. Yes. But he loved my mother. The pause this time was different. Heavier. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. Harry had looked at the fire. Right, he said. So he's not the problem. He looked back at Dumbledore. You should still tell McGonagall. She's the most competent person in this building after you and she deserves to know what's in it. He said it flatly, as a fact. I'm telling you this as the person who would be most affected by what happens next, so I'm giving you my input, tell McGonagall. Dumbledore had looked at him for a long moment and then said, You are remarkably like your mother. Good, Harry said. She sounds like she was excellent. Hermione had developed the habit of knowing when Harry was thinking in the particular way that meant he'd heard something he was processing, as opposed to the way that meant he was just genuinely interested in how magic worked, which was most of the time. She had, with her characteristic efficiency, decided that the correct approach to this distinction was simply to ask directly. You know something, she said one evening in the common room, not looking up from her charms essay. About whatever's in the third-floor corridor. What makes you say that? Harry said. You've been doing the thing with your jaw. What thing? The thing where you're running scenarios. You get very still and your jaw does something. She looked up. I've read all 7 editions of Hogwarts, a history and 3 supplementary volumes, and I cannot find any record of a large protected area on the 3rd floor being used for anything other than storage, which means whatever's there is recent, which means someone put it there deliberately, which means it's valuable enough to hide under this many protections. She set down her quill. What is it? Harry looked at her. At Neville, who was sitting nearby and had looked up from his herbology notes and was wearing his expression of resigned inclusion, the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by the discovery that his friends were in the middle of something and had started accepting it as a general condition. He had thought about how much to tell them. Had gone back and forth on it with the particular care he brought to decisions that affected other people. Dumbledore's instinct was compartmentalization, give people only what they needed and no more, on the theory that less information meant less risk. Harry's instinct was the opposite, formed by years of watching Charles Xavier navigate the difference between protecting people and disempowering them. If I tell you, Harry said, you're involved. Genuinely involved. Not just observing. I'm already involved, Hermione said. I'm in this school and it's happening here. Neville, Harry said. Neville considered this with the careful thoroughness he brought to anything that had stakes. I want to know, he said. So Harry told them. Not everything, not Voldemort's fragment, not the mirror, not the full shape of what Dumbledore had shared, but the relevant structure. Something was in the corridor, someone in the school was trying to get to it, and it was worth protecting. Someone on the staff? Hermione said immediately. Yes. Snape, she said. No, Harry said. She looked at him. He was at the Quidditch match, I saw him, he was muttering something, it looked like he was performing a counter-curse, Harry said. Someone else was cursing my broom. Snape was stopping it. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Reconsidered. How do you know? I can feel intent, Harry said simply. When someone is directing something at you, it has a texture. What Snape was doing felt like blocking. Not attacking. You can feel intent, Hermione said. It's part of what I am, Harry said. I told you there were things that were mine. She absorbed this. All right. Then who? Harry looked at his hands. Quirrell. Hermione and Neville both looked at him, and the silence was the specific silence of a surprising answer that, once said, was obviously correct. He faints when he sees dark creatures, Neville said slowly. He fainted at the troll. But the troll was already in the school, which means, someone let it in, Harry said. As a distraction, Hermione said. She had gone into the rapid internal processing that Harry had come to think of as her highest function, the face she made when information was rearranging itself into something new and she was following it. To get to whatever's in the corridor, while everyone was dealing with the troll. Yes, Harry said. Except you were dealing with the troll and not everyone went to the corridor. She looked at him. Did you go? No. I was dealing with the troll. So whatever's up there, he didn't get it on Halloween. No. Harry, she said. What is it? What's in the corridor? He told them about the stone. Not Dumbledore's confidence exactly, but what he'd reasoned out himself and what the headmaster had confirmed. He watched them take it, Hermione going very still with the focus of it, Neville's eyes going through a series of emotions in quick succession, and he watched them come to the same place on the other side of it. Right, Hermione said. So what do we do? Harry looked at her. At Neville. At the fire in the Gryffindor common room. We wait, he said. He hasn't moved yet. He's building towards something. He paused. When he moves, we'll know. He knew on a Tuesday in June. He woke up knowing it, the way he sometimes woke up knowing things, not knowledge exactly, more a shift in the quality of the air, a change in what the castle's ambient magic was doing. The wrongness that had been a background texture since September had changed frequency. It was louder. It was doing something. Hermione was already awake when he came downstairs. She looked at him and said, "Tonight?" "I think so," Harry said. Neville came down 10 minutes later rubbing his eyes and saw both of their faces and sat down and said, "What do I need to do?" They spent the morning in ordinary classes, which Harry found surreal in the way that surreal things were surreal, the surface of life continuing normally while something significant moved beneath it. He paid attention in charms. He ate lunch. He wrote 2 inches of a transfiguration essay that was due Thursday. Through all of it, the wrongness built at the back of his awareness like a headache that hadn't arrived yet. At dinner he looked down the staff table at Quirrell, who was eating nothing and looking at his plate and whose mind, even at this distance, even through the general psychic noise of 600 students eating and talking, was doing something frantic and compressed. Harry looked away. After dinner he went to the common room and picked up his wand and put it in his pocket and told Hermione and Neville, "Stay here." "Harry, this isn't me protecting you," Harry said. "This is me saying that what's up there is going to be specific, and the fewer people involved the simpler the outcome. If I'm not back by midnight, get McGonagall." "That's not," Hermione started. "Hermione," he said, and something in his voice made her stop, not her name said as a command but as something more genuine, the sound of someone telling you that they know what they're doing and they need you to let them. "I will be fine. I promise you I will be fine." He paused. "Midnight. McGonagall." She held his gaze for a moment and then pressed her lips together and gave a single nod that cost her something. Neville said, "Be careful." "I will," Harry said. He was out of the portrait hole and into the corridor and moving. The third-floor corridor was still. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that came after movement, after disturbance, the air remembering what had just been in it. Harry moved through it and the protections were already compromised, doors open that should have been closed, Fluffy's room with the harp still playing in the corner, the great dog asleep and snoring with a sound like distant thunder. Harry looked at the trapdoor. He went through. The protections beneath were remarkable. He'd read about what Dumbledore had described as a series of challenges from various teachers, and he moved through them with a combination of wand work and the abilities that were his and not quite categorizable, the fire in his hands lighting the devil's snare back without needing Hermione's detailed botanical knowledge, the winged keys presenting a pattern that his mind mapped in seconds and resolved, the chessmen, enormous, stone, genuinely prepared to destroy you, parting as he walked through them because he put his hand up and the gold light said no and they stopped. He did not feel theatrical about any of it. He felt clear, the way he felt in training, present, precise, each move following the last without hesitation. The last chamber was the mirror of Eriste. And in front of it was Quirrell. He was not wearing the turban. Harry registered this detail and its implications simultaneously. The turban had been a concealment, and its absence meant concealment was no longer the priority. Quirrell's posture was different without it. Less performatively nervous, more simply wrong, the wrongness visible now, structural, the posture of someone who was sharing their body with something that was not friendly to the arrangement. Quirrell turned when Harry entered the chamber. "Potter," he said. The stutter was gone. "Professor," Harry said. "You worked it out." It wasn't a question. "How long?" "First week," Harry said. Something moved in Quirrell's expression, not offense but consideration, the recalibration of a man updating his assessment. "The headmaster knows you're here, yes." Harry looked at the mirror. "You haven't gotten the stone." "Not yet." Quirrell turned back to the mirror, and his frustration was visible and genuine, the frustration of a problem that was not yielding to his approach. "I can see it. In the mirror. But I cannot reach it. It reflects but does not give." "That's the point of the protection," Harry said. "I know that," Quirrell said sharply. "I need someone else to look into it. Someone who wants to find it but not use it." He turned. "You." Harry stood still. "I'm not helping you," Harry said. "You don't have a choice." Quirrell raised his wand, and his manner had completed its transition, the nervous professor entirely gone, replaced by something competent and cold and certain. "You're 11 years old." "Almost 12, Harry said. "You're a child," Quirrell said. "However remarkable. Stand in front of the mirror, Potter. Look into it. Tell me what you see." Harry looked at him. "At the wand. At the mirror." Then he walked toward the mirror. Quirrell watched him with the attention of someone who had won a negotiation. Harry stood in front of the mirror. He looked. The mirror showed him, himself. Not a future self, not a fantasy self, not himself with parents alive and standing beside him, not himself as a symbol or a hero or anything else. Just him. Standing exactly where he was standing, in his school robes, with his wand in his pocket and his hands at his sides, and in his reflected hands, the stone. He felt it in his actual pocket immediately. Warm. Dense. Real. He understood the protection in that moment with complete clarity. The stone went to someone who wanted it but not for themselves, someone who looked at the mirror and saw themselves exactly as they were without adding something they desired, because what they desired was simply to have it safely and not to use it. Harry stood in front of the mirror with the stone in his pocket and looked at his reflection and said nothing. "What do you see?" Quirrell said. "Myself," Harry said. "And? That's all. Just me." Quirrell stepped forward. "You're lying." "I don't lie," Harry said, which was true in the specific way that mattered. He was not lying, he was simply not telling the complete truth, which was a different tool. Quirrell grabbed his arm. The contact was like an electrical charge, not painful, something stranger than pain, the specific sensation of touching something that was layered, that had more than one presence in it, and the deeper presence reaching out toward Harry the way a cold thing reached toward warmth. "What a useful boy you are," said a voice. Not Quirrell's voice. From the back of Quirrell's head, from beneath it, resonating up through the body, it was inhabiting the way water resonated through a vessel. The voice was thin and cold and wrong in the way that wrongness had a texture and a direction, and it reached toward Harry with the hunger of something that had been reduced and knew it. Harry looked at Quirrell's face. "That's him," he said. "Yes," Quirrell said, though his lips were barely moving. "Hello," Harry said, to the voice. The voice that was Voldemort laughed, or performed a laugh, the sound of amusement from something that was not using amusement in any conventional way. "Harry Potter," it said. "Not quite what I expected." "Nobody ever expects me correctly," Harry said. I expected a frightened child, Voldemort said. I expected a boy shaped by grief and ignorance, ready to be used or destroyed. What I find instead is, a pause. The quality of it was different from Dumbledore's pauses. It was not the pause of someone processing. It was the pause of something that had encountered a variable outside its model and was running it rapidly. Remarkable, it said. What are you? Mine, Harry said. Just mine. Quirrell's hand was still on his arm. The contact pulsed, Voldemort pressing against the barrier of Harry's presence, reaching for the warmth in him, reaching for the phoenix with the specific hunger of something that had been dealing in death for so long that life was the thing it wanted most. Harry felt it. The reach. The pressure. The fingers of something old and dark probing at the edges of what he was. He let the warmth come up. Not a decision exactly. More the natural response of a fire to wind, it didn't bank, it rose. The warmth in his hands, in his bones, the phoenix in him that had been patient and alive for 11 years, came up without fanfare, without performance, without any of the theatrical quality that it could have carried if Harry had been someone who needed theater. It was simply there. Present. Gold and white and absolutely uninterested in anything Voldemort was reaching for. Quirrell screamed. The contact broke, his hand released Harry's arm and he stumbled back, and where his fingers had been there were marks on his own palm, not burns exactly but the evidence of something that had resisted him very thoroughly. The scream was not Quirrell's scream. The voice underneath it was not screaming from pain. It was screaming from recognition. What is that? Voldemort said, and the cold certainty was gone from the voice, replaced by something that took Harry a moment to identify because he had not heard it before from anything that called itself Lord. Fear. You know what it is, Harry said. That's, the phoenix, you carry the phoenix. How do you carry the? It chose me, Harry said, with the simple accuracy of fact. The same way it chose someone else I know. We're not so different that way. He took a step toward Quirrell, who was backing away, his hands shaking. Get out of him. I will kill him before I leave. No, Harry said, you won't. He put his hand on Quirrell's chest. The warmth went out of him and into Quirrell the way light went into a dark room when you opened the door, not aggressive, not destroying, simply filling the space that something else had been occupying. Quirrell's body understood it immediately, the way a body understood warmth when it had been cold, leaning toward it without direction. Voldemort did not lean. What followed was not a battle in any cinematic sense. There was no clash of light and darkness, no dramatic exchange of spells. There was simply, Harry's hand on Quirrell's chest, the phoenix warmth going into and through, and Voldemort's fragment encountering that warmth and having nowhere to go, nothing to hold on to, the cold dark thing finding that it could not grip the light and burning at the contact, shrinking, unraveling, the logic of a thing that survived by inhabiting others meeting the logic of a thing that could not be inhabited. Quirrell went to his knees. Harry stayed with him. His hand on the man's chest, the warmth steady, no variation in its pressure, patient and thorough and entirely without cruelty. The screaming stopped. The wrongness in the room, the specific wrongness Harry had been reading since September, the layered compressed misaligned quality of a presence that didn't belong, was gone. Quirrell collapsed forward and Harry caught him and lowered him to the ground and the man's body was his own again, just his, the absence of the other presence in it so complete that the room felt lighter. Harry knelt beside him. Quirrell was breathing. Shallow and fast, the breathing of someone who had been through something their body didn't have a category for, but breathing. Can you hear me? Harry said. Quirrell's eyes opened. They were his own eyes, not the flat, managed eyes of the host, but the actual eyes of the man, frightened and exhausted and entirely present. He's gone. Quirrell said. Yes, Harry said. How? I have something he couldn't survive contact with. Quirrell looked at him. At Harry's hand still on his chest, the gold warmth fading now back to its resting state, the candle rather than the fire. You're a child, he said. And it was not Quirrell the Death Eater tool, not Quirrell the host, just, a man, bewildered and reduced, saying a true thing. Almost 12, Harry said. He took his hand away. Don't move. I'll get help. He stood up. The mirror of Eriste reflected them both from behind, Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, and in the mirror's surface, Harry's reflection was not looking at itself. It was looking outward. Straight at him. He looked at the reflection for a moment. The reflection raised its hand. Harry raised his. Then he turned away from the mirror and walked out of the chamber. Dumbledore arrived within 4 minutes, which meant he had been closer than he'd implied and had been waiting. Harry clocked this and filed it. Not anger, it would have been less precise to be angry about it than to note it as information. Dumbledore had let him go into the corridor because he believed that Harry going was the outcome that addressed the problem most cleanly. He had been right, which was not the same as him being fully honest about it. McGonagall was with him. She looked at Harry, standing in the corridor outside the chamber, arms loose at his sides, unhurt, the particular quality of someone who had done something and was not performing either triumph or damage, and she looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor McGonagall," Harry said. "Are you injured?" "No." "Is Quirrell alive?" "In the last chamber. He needs medical attention. The other presence is gone." He looked at Dumbledore. "I have the stone." He put his hand in his pocket and placed the stone on the stone floor of the corridor, between himself and the headmaster. Dumbledore looked at it. Then at Harry. "You could feel where it was," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Harry said. "Because the mirror showed me what I actually wanted," Harry said. "Which was to have it safely so that no one could use it." He paused. The protection worked exactly as intended. Whoever designed it understood something real about the relationship between desire and safety. "I designed it," Dumbledore said. "Then you understand something real about that relationship," Harry said. "Which is more than most people do." Dumbledore picked up the stone very carefully, the way you picked up something irreplaceable, and looked at Harry over it with those eyes that were doing the thing again, the calculation, the assessment, the movement of a mind that was very large and very old encountering something it had not fully modeled. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said. "Several, actually." "You owe me honesty," Harry said. "I'll take that instead." "They're not mutually exclusive." "No," Harry agreed. "They're not. But honesty is more useful." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The prophecy," he said. "I told you about the stone. There are other things I haven't told you that are, a conversation for when I'm not standing in a dungeon corridor at 2 in the morning, Harry said. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "Fair enough." McGonagall had gone into the chamber to deal with Quirrell, and Harry could hear her precise, authoritative voice managing the situation with the efficiency of a woman who had managed a great many situations and had no patience for the ones that arose from insufficient information sharing. He thought about the fact that Dumbledore had eventually listened about including her. Small point in the positive column. "Harry," Dumbledore said. The twinkle was back, partially, but different than before, less deployed, more genuine. "What you did tonight required not just power, but judgment. Restraint. You could have, I know what I could have done," Harry said. "Yes. I believe you do." He looked at the stone in his palm. "Voldemort is not destroyed. You know that. What you dispersed tonight was a fragment, a remnant. The larger threat remains," Harry said. "I know. I read The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts on the train." He looked at the old man steadily. "I'm not done, Professor." Neither is he. "But tonight, this specific problem is closed." "Yes," Dumbledore said softly. "It is." Harry looked down the corridor toward the stairs, toward the castle above them, toward the common room where Hermione and Neville were counting minutes and McGonagall had been assigned to tell them something at midnight. I need to talk to my family, he said. Of course, Dumbledore said. Harry walked toward the stairs. He paused, half-turned. The stone, he said. Flamel should probably know. I'll contact him immediately. Good. He looked at Dumbledore one more time. Same time next week for the honest conversation. Dumbledore blinked. About the prophecy, Harry said. And Voldemort's actual status. And whatever else is in that long list of things you've been managing. He said it without heat, without accusation, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone making a Tuesday appointment. I'd rather know than not. It's consistently been more useful. Tuesday, Dumbledore said. After dinner. Tuesday, Harry agreed. He turned and went up the stairs. Hermione was awake. She was sitting in the armchair closest to the portrait hole with a book in her lap that she was definitely not reading, and when he came through the portrait hole her eyes went over him in approximately 1 second, physical check, emotional check, status assessment. You're fine, she said. I'm fine, he confirmed. And the other, resolved. She closed the book. Something went out of her that had been held tight since approximately dinner, and she looked suddenly more her age, younger than the anxious controlled version that had been running since Harry left. Neville's asleep, she said. He tried to stay up. Harry looked at Neville, who was on the sofa with his herbology book on his chest and his mouth slightly open and his expression entirely peaceful. Good, Harry said. Hermione stood up and crossed the room and, quite without warning, quite without her usual careful consideration of whether a thing was appropriate before doing it, she put her arms around him. Not long. Just for a moment. The hug of someone for whom hugging was not a default language but who had decided that in this specific instance the words available were insufficient. Harry returned it. Thank you, he said. For staying. I didn't do anything, she said, pulling back. You stayed, he said, when I asked you to, and you trusted me when you didn't have all the information. That's not nothing. That's a significant amount of something. She looked at him. Was it, later, he said. Properly, tomorrow, I'll tell you all of it. You and Neville both. He looked at the fire. But he was there. Voldemort. A part of him. And he's gone now. She processed this with the speed she processed everything and arrived where he expected her to. You faced Voldemort, she said. A fragment of him. At 11 years old. Almost 12. Hermione Granger looked at Harry Potter and made an expression that was too complicated to be a single thing, relief and frustration and some variety of resigned fondness and something she probably couldn't have named yet. Bed, she said. Yes, Harry said. Definitely bed. He went upstairs and lay down and looked at the ceiling of the dormitory, where 5 other boys were asleep and the castle was quiet around them, and he put his hand over his chest and felt his own heartbeat, steady and real. He reached for his communication mirror on the nightstand. Jean answered in 30 seconds, which meant she hadn't been fully asleep. Her face in the mirror, dark, concerned, trying to be calm, settled immediately when she saw his face. You're okay, she said. I'm okay, he said. What happened? I found Voldemort. A beat. Harry, he's gone. For now. He looked at her face in the mirror, the face that was more familiar to him than any face in any world, the face that had been on the floor outside his room at 3 in the morning when he was 4 years old and had been there every time since. I'm okay, Jean. I promise. She looked at him for a long moment. He could feel her across the distance, the warmth they shared, the Phoenix warmth, reaching across the miles between New York and Scotland like a hand extended in the dark. He reached back. I'm coming for Christmas, he said. I want Logan to teach me the thing with the elbow lock. I've been thinking about the application and, Harry, Jean said. Yeah. Her eyes were very bright. Well done, she said. He looked at her. Felt the warmth of it, the specificity of those 2 words from her, not you were brave or I knew you could do it or any of the things that were true but were about someone else's idea of him. Just, well done. An acknowledgement of the thing he'd actually done, from someone who knew exactly what it had cost and what it was worth. Thanks, he said. He held the mirror until she told him to sleep, and then he put it down and closed his eyes, and the castle was quiet around him, and the warmth in his chest was steady and gold, and he slept. Chapter 6, Two Worlds, One Boy. The end of year feast was 3 days after the stone, and by then the story had moved through Hogwarts the way stories moved through enclosed communities, rapidly, imprecisely, and with the specific momentum of something that everyone felt entitled to an opinion about despite knowing very little of the actual substance. What the students knew, Quirrell had been taken to St. Mungo's. Harry Potter had been involved in something on the 3rd floor. Points had been awarded at the last minute, a dramatic table turning that had pushed Gryffindor past Slytherin for the House Cup with a margin that was either inspiring or scandalous depending on which table you sat at. What the students did not know, most of it. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Hermione and Neville and ate roast chicken and listened to the noise of 600 people in various states of celebration or disappointment, and he thought about the conversation he'd had with Dumbledore on Tuesday, which had been substantial. Substantial was the word. Dumbledore had told him about the prophecy, reciting it in full with the careful precision of a man reading something he had memorized and wished he hadn't. Harry had listened to it twice and then sat with it for a moment. Neither can live while the other survives. He had turned it over. Examined it. Felt for the shape of it the way you felt for a load-bearing wall in a building, not to knock it down, but to understand what was holding what up. You interpreted this, he said to Dumbledore, as meaning one of us has to die. That is one reading, yes. It's a very specific reading, Harry said. Neither can live while the other survives. That's a statement about a present condition, not a prescription for a future action. He looked at the old man. It doesn't say one of us has to kill the other. It says the current situation, the one where he's partially alive and I'm partially at risk, can't continue. That's different. Dumbledore had looked at him with the expression Harry was becoming familiar with, the one that recalibrated. You're 11, he said. Almost 12, Harry said, for what was becoming a reflexive count. And yes. But the reading matters. Because if you've been building a plan around one interpretation of an ambiguous statement, and the statement can mean something else, the plan has a problem. And what, Dumbledore said quietly, would your interpretation suggest? That the situation resolves when one or both of us is fully what we are, Harry said. Not when one of us is dead. Voldemort is currently a fragment, he's not fully alive. I'm currently 11 and I've been doing this for approximately 1 school year. Neither of us is operating at full capacity. The prophecy might just be describing the current state. He paused. Or I could be wrong. But I'd rather be wrong having thought it through than right by accident. Dumbledore had been quiet for a long time. Long enough that Fawkes had made his sound, that single pure note, landing in the silence like a stone in still water. Your mother, Dumbledore said eventually, used to do this. Take something I believed settled and find the edge of it and pull. Did it bother you? Harry asked. Enormously, Dumbledore said. And she was always right. Harry had looked at the fire. Tell me about her, he said. It was not a request he'd made before, not to Dumbledore, and the making of it now was itself a choice, a decision that the man across from him had known Lily Potter and that knowledge had value, whatever else was complicated about him. And Dumbledore had told him. Not the story, the person. The woman who was the best student he'd taught in 40 years, who had argued with him about potions theory in her 3rd year and been correct, who had loved James Potter with a ferocity that was entirely characteristic, who had made the choice she made at the end with complete clarity and without hesitation. Harry had listened and held the shape of her and thought, I'm going to know you properly. I'm going to find every person who knew you and build you out of their memories until I know what you actually were. It was not grief, exactly. More like a project. More like the purposeful act of a person who had learned that love was not passive, it was something you built and maintained. He thought about this now, at the feast, and Hermione said, "You've got your thinking face on." "I'm always thinking," Harry said. "There are levels," she said. "This is the level where something large is happening internally and you're being polite about it." She handed him the rolls. "Eat something." He took a roll. "How are you going to spend the summer?" "Books," she said. "My parents are taking me to France in August, which is lovely, but June and July are mine and I have a reading list." She said this the way other people said I'm going to sleep for 3 days, with pure anticipatory pleasure. "You." "New York," Harry said. "And then, I don't know. I need to talk to Logan about advanced combat work and Jean wants to do a structured telepathy deep dive over the summer and Charles has been corresponding with Dumbledore about formalizing some kind of relationship between the two institutions, which is a conversation I want to be in the room for." Neville, on his other side, said, "Is it strange? Going between the two?" Harry considered this honestly. "It was strange the first time," he said. "Diagon Alley, the first time I walked in there and it was all real. A whole world that was also mine and I hadn't known it. That was strange." He looked at the hall, at the enchanted ceiling that was showing a clear summer night, the stars sharp and real above the candles. "Now it just feels like I'm tall enough to see over 2 walls instead of 1. Neville thought about this. Nodded. "That's a good way to put it." "He reads a lot," Hermione said to Neville, in the tone of an explanation. "I heard that," Harry said. "I know," Hermione said. The letter from Charles arrived on the last morning of term. Harry was packing his trunk, Hedwig already caged and ready, when the owl came through the window with the Xavier Institute seal on it, Charles's handwriting, precise and measured, in the dark blue ink he used for personal correspondence. He read it twice. Then he sat on the edge of his bed and read it a 3rd time. Charles had been in contact with Dumbledore for 3 weeks, the correspondence had begun the day after the stone incident, which meant the day after Harry had contacted Jean in the mirror and Jean had, almost certainly, called Charles before she went back to sleep. The letters had covered the basic structure of the situation, Harry's dual nature, the magical world's claim on him, the Institute's role in his formation, and the question of what a sustainable arrangement looked like going forward. Dumbledore, to his credit, had engaged with it. He had written back substantively, had answered Charles's questions with what Charles described as surprising candor, suggesting a man who has been shown the limits of his previous approach and is genuinely reconsidering. The part that made Harry read it 3 times was at the end. "I've invited Professor Dumbledore and 2 of his senior staff to the Institute for a meeting in late July. I thought it appropriate to discuss the terms of your education at Hogwarts, and the continuation of your development here, in a setting where all parties are present and informed. I also thought you should know that Logan has been informed of this meeting, and his only comment was, 'Fine, but I'm not wearing a suit.'" Harry smiled at this. It was a very specific image, Logan in a room with Albus Dumbledore, Logan in no suit whatsoever, the entire existential comedy of those 2 people in the same building. He folded the letter and put it in his inside pocket, closed his trunk, picked up Hedwig's cage, and went downstairs. The train south was full and warm and drowsy in the way of journeys that were ending rather than beginning. Harry sat with Hermione and Neville in their compartment and they talked about everything and nothing, about the year, about the summer, about things that had nothing to do with Voldemort or stones or sorting hats, things that were simply the texture of 3 people who had decided they were friends and were now dealing with the first time they'd be separated since that decision. Hermione gave Harry a list. He looked at it. It was books, 14 titles, annotated with her own notes in the margins, the ones she thought he needed for 2nd year based on the syllabi she'd obtained from McGonagall before they left. "You annotated the list," Harry said. "The annotations are more useful than the list," she said. "Hermione, you wrote more than some of these books probably contain." "That's an exaggeration," she said. "Only 2 of them." Neville gave him a cutting from one of Aurora's plants that he'd somehow obtained permission for, a small, sturdy thing in a clay pot that he'd wrapped carefully in cloth. For your room, he said. Mimbulus Mimbletonia. It's very interesting, actually. It has a defense mechanism that's, tell me, Harry said. Neville's face did the thing it did when someone wanted to know about plants, opened, brightened, the specific joy of a person whose subject had been validated. He talked about the Mimbulus Mimbletonia for 20 minutes and Harry listened and asked questions and Hermione, who had initially opened her book, was also listening by the end, taking notes on a small pad she produced from her bag without comment. At King's Cross, they came through the barrier one after another and stood on the London side of it in the noise and light, and it was briefly strange, this very ordinary station, this very ordinary city, after everything that had been the year. Neville's grandmother was there first, a formidable woman in a large hat who looked at Neville and then looked at Harry with an expression that said she had opinions about the end-of-year events and the specificity of Neville's involvement in them, but she pressed her lips together and said simply, "Mr. Potter." Well done. It was, Harry sensed, a significant concession from someone for whom concessions did not come easily. Hermione's parents were next. Both of them dentists, both of them with Hermione's same air of thorough attention to everything around them, both of them looking at Harry with the warmth of people whose child had written home about him specifically and at length. Her mother shook his hand and said, "She talks about you constantly." "Mum," Hermione said. "She does," her father confirmed, affably. "I talk about both of them," Hermione said. "It's a collective, she talks about you slightly more," her father said to Harry, entirely pleasantly. Hermione made a sound that would have been a groan from someone less composed. Harry shook both their hands and looked at Hermione. "France," he said. "Write me from France." "I was going to write regardless," she said. "I have 17 questions about your other abilities that I didn't want to put in a letter from school but I can now." 17. Currently. I'll probably have more by July. He laughed. Real, sudden, the sound of genuine delight. She looked slightly surprised by it and then not surprised, settling into it the way people settled into things that were good, and she nodded once and turned and went with her parents. Logan was at the back of the station. He was not standing at the barrier with the other parents. He was leaning against the far wall near the exits, arms crossed, jacket, the expression of a man who had decided the convention of waiting at a designated spot was a suggestion rather than a requirement. He looked exactly the same as he had looked when he'd handed Harry onto the train back in September, which was to say, like himself, completely and without modification for context. Harry walked toward him, trunk behind him, Hedwig's cage in his other hand, and when he was close enough Logan's eyes moved over him, the same check he'd done 1,000 times in the training room, looking for damage or change, cataloging. "You're the same height," Logan said. "I told you I probably wasn't going to have a growth spurt in one school term. Kids grow." "I ate well," Harry said. "I'll grow properly." He looked at Logan. "Jean not coming?" "She's at the car." Logan looked at the cage. "How's the owl?" "Excellent. Very dignified." "Good." A pause. "Charles tell you about the meeting?" "This morning," Harry said. "Dumbledore coming to the Institute." Logan made the sound he made about things he had accepted without being enthusiastic about the acceptance. "It'll be interesting," Harry said. "That's one word," Logan said. Harry smiled. "You're not going to be in a suit." "Absolutely not," Logan said, with a completeness that left no room for discussion. He looked at Harry for another moment, and something in his face did the complicated thing that it did when he was choosing between several true things and deciding which one to give out loud. He settled on, "Good year." "Good year," Harry said. "Learn anything?" "A great deal." "Handle yourself?" "Yes." "Problems coming?" "Always," Harry said. "That's consistent in both worlds." Logan nodded. Small, single, the nod that meant, correct, acceptable, I have no notes. He turned toward the exit. "Jean's got lunch in the car. She made the soup. The good soup." Is there another kind? Harry picked up his trunk and followed him out into the London summer, the grey sky and the city noise and the particular smell of a large place containing too many people and going about it cheerfully, and none of it was Scotland or Hogwarts or the castle with its living stones, but all of it was home in the way that mattered most. Jean was at the car. She saw him coming and she did what she always did, which was nothing dramatic. She didn't run, she didn't call out, she just looked at him and the warmth between them moved like it always did, the Phoenix connection, the shared warmth of two people who carried the same fire. He walked straight into the hug. She wrapped her arms around him and he felt the specific quality of it, the particular safety of being held by someone who knew exactly what you were and held you anyway, held you because of it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said into her shoulder. "Full year," she said. "Very full," he agreed. She pulled back and looked at his face, reading it the way she always did, not invasively, just with the profound attention of someone who had been watching this face since it was 4 years old and still found new things in it. "You met him. A piece of him. And he was afraid," Harry said. "Of the Phoenix. He knew what it was immediately and it frightened him." He said it not with triumph but with the plain register of useful information. "That's worth knowing." "It is," Jean said. "I also made 2 proper friends," Harry said. "One has read every book in existence and has 17 questions for me, and one grows plants and is braver than he thinks he is." "Tell me about them," Jean said. They got in the car, Logan driving, Jean in the passenger seat turned sideways to face Harry in the back, Hedwig's cage wedged carefully beside him, and they went north through London traffic and Harry talked, and Jean listened, and Logan drove and didn't say much and heard everything. July came, and with it the meeting. Harry was in the training room with Logan the morning of, working on something they'd been developing over the summer, the integration of his telepathy with his physical instincts, the precise calibration of reading intent and responding to it before it fully manifested, which was the difference between reacting and preempting and was, Logan said, what separated good from exceptional. "You're still waiting for the intent to solidify," Logan said. "You feel it forming and you wait until you're sure before you move. That's caution. It's good in most situations. But in the situations where it isn't good, it'll cost you. If I move on intent that hasn't solidified, I could act on something that doesn't happen," Harry said. "Yes. What's the cost of that?" "I've acted unnecessarily. I've potentially revealed my read to an opponent who was testing me." "And the cost of not moving when you should have?" Harry was quiet. "Right," Logan said. "You calibrate for the situation. Low stakes, wait for certainty. High stakes, trust the read." He looked at Harry. "You trust your read in low-stakes situations. You hesitate in high-stakes ones because the cost of being wrong is bigger. But your read doesn't get worse because the stakes are higher. If anything, it gets cleaner," Harry said. He'd noticed this. Under pressure, the telepathic signal clarified, like a radio station coming in better in a storm. The noise drops out. "So trust it," Logan said simply. They worked for another hour and Harry's movement changed, not dramatically, but the slight waiting quality went out of it, the half-second delay between reading and response that he hadn't fully realized was there until it wasn't. Logan ran him through scenarios, incoming intent varying, and Harry moved through them with the clean fluidity of someone operating on a signal he'd stopped second-guessing. "There it is," Logan said. Harry came to a stop, breathing easy. "How long before Dumbledore arrives?" 2 hours, Logan said. "Charles wants you showered and presentable." "I'm always presentable." "You have training mat on your face." Harry wiped his cheek. "Better?" "Marginally," Logan said. "Go." Charles had set the meeting in the large study on the ground floor, not his private study, the formal one that was used for the Institute's official business, lined with books and with 2 large windows that looked over the grounds. When Harry came down at 3 o'clock the room was already occupied. Dumbledore was there. He was not wearing robes, He had made what was clearly a considered concession to the setting, in a very good suit in a shade of deep blue that was nonetheless somehow still characteristically himself. He had Professors McGonagall and Flitwick with him, both in Muggle clothes of varying success. McGonagall had achieved complete competence. Flitwick had achieved something that was enthusiastic and broadly in the right category. Charles was behind his desk, with Hank McCoy beside him and Jean standing near the window. Aurora was in the corner. Logan was leaning against the bookshelf with his arms crossed and no suit, exactly as promised, his expression the one he used for rooms full of people he was reserving judgment on. Harry came in and felt the room shift slightly, the attention of everyone in it landing on him at once, from both directions. He recognized it as the thing that happened when he was in the middle of two worlds at the same time, when both sets of context that defined him were present simultaneously. He crossed to Dumbledore first. Shook his hand. "Professor." "Harry," Dumbledore said, with genuine warmth. McGonagall shook his hand with the brisk economy of a woman who expressed affection through competence. "Mr. Potter." A pause. "You look well." "Good summer so far," he said. He looked at Flitwick, who shook his hand with great enthusiasm. "Professor Flitwick." "Wonderful to see you, Mr. Potter. Your charms work this year was really quite exceptional. There was a particular variant on the levitation charm you produced in March that I've been meaning to discuss, Phileas," McGonagall said. Later, Flitwick finished agreeably. Harry went and stood beside Jean, who put her hand briefly on his shoulder, and they all sat or settled or leaned according to their natures, and the meeting began. Charles opened it with the particular measured calm that was his professional register, the voice he used when large things needed to be said without being made to feel larger than the room could hold. He laid out the situation, Harry's history, his development at the Institute, his dual nature, mutant and magical, and the fact that both had bearing on his future and both required honest engagement from all parties in the room. Dumbledore listened with complete attention. When Charles finished, he said, "I want to say something before we discuss the practical details." He looked at Logan and Jean directly. "What you did, what you gave him, is something I failed to provide. I made a strategic choice 11 years ago that was not, in practice, in Harry's interest, whatever my intentions were. What he is now," he paused. "I did not create that. You did. And I want to acknowledge that clearly, because I think clarity on that point is important before we discuss anything else." The room was very quiet. Logan looked at Dumbledore for a long time with the expression of a man performing a thorough assessment. "All right," he said. "Just that." From Logan, it was enormous. Jean said, "Thank you." Simple, real, no performance. Harry looked at Dumbledore and thought about the old man in his office telling him about Lily Potter, her brilliance and her stubbornness and the specific quality of her love. He thought about the letter and the cupboard in Surrey and everything between then and now. He thought about the word genuine and what it cost and what it was worth. "Now," Harry said, "can we talk about the prophecy?" Every head in the room turned to him. "Because I've been thinking about the interpretation since June," he continued, "and I think there's an argument that we've all been working from a reading of it that closes down options unnecessarily. And I'd like to lay out the alternative reading and see what Dumbledore and Charles and Jean think, because it has implications for everything else we're going to discuss today." McGonagall was looking at him with the expression she'd worn since the Sorting Hat, the one that was still being resolved. Flitwick had produced a notebook and a very small quill from somewhere. Hank had quietly shifted forward in his chair. Dumbledore said, "Please." Harry laid it out. The same argument he'd made in June, but fuller now. He'd spent the summer reading about prophecy mechanics and their interpretation, reading about the history of oracular statements in magical tradition, reading Charles's notes on psychic prediction and how post-diction framed prior ambiguity as certainty. He built the argument with the same precision Jean had taught him to bring to telepathic architecture, each point a brick, the structure rising. Neither can live while the other survives did not mean one of them had to kill the other. It described a present condition. It described the current impossibility of coexistence while Voldemort was neither fully destroyed nor truly alive, and while Harry was, incomplete, the prophecy's subject without yet the full scope of what he was. The resolution, Harry said, isn't necessarily death. It might be completion. What changes when Voldemort is fully and permanently destroyed isn't that one of us is dead, it's that the condition the prophecy describes ceases to exist. He stops surviving in the fragment sense and starts being fully gone. At which point the constraint dissolves. He stopped. The room was quiet. Flitwick's quill was moving very fast. McGonagall said, "That's an extraordinary piece of analytical reasoning for someone who has been studying magic for 1 year." "I grew up around Charles Xavier," Harry said. "He has books on everything." Dumbledore was looking at the fire. He had been looking at it for the last 2 minutes, in the way he looked at things when he was genuinely thinking rather than performing thought. Harry waited. He had learned the quality of Dumbledore's genuine processing silences. "There is," Dumbledore said finally, slowly, "a possibility that you're correct." "A possibility," Harry said. "Which is better than a certainty that you're wrong." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Yes, it is." He looked at Harry. "Your mother would have had that exact argument in the same language at approximately the same age. With the same look on her face." "You keep saying that," Harry said. "Because it keeps being true." He laced his fingers together. "All right. Given this reading, given the possibility that the resolution is destruction rather than sacrifice, what does that change about our approach?" "Everything," Harry said. "If the goal is to fully and permanently destroy Voldemort rather than to position me as the weapon that destroys him at cost to myself, then the preparation is different. The training is different. The information I need is different." He looked around the room, Logan, Jean, Charles, Dumbledore. "I want all of you in the same plan. Not separate plans that you're managing in pieces. One plan, with everyone holding their part of it and everyone knowing what everyone else's part is." "That is considerably more complex to manage," Charles said. "Complex is fine," Harry said. "Opaque isn't." Logan made a sound that was agreement. Jean said, "He's right." Charles looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Charles. They were, Harry observed, 2 very old men who had spent their careers building systems around the necessary limitation of information, encountering an 11-year-old who had been educated by both of them and had arrived at the conclusion that their shared instinct was the problem. There was something almost funny about it. "All right," Charles said. "All right," Dumbledore said. "Good," Harry said. "Let's start with what you each know about Voldemort's anchors." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, several things had been established. Dumbledore had told the room about Horcruxes, the word landing with specific gravity, the concept explaining the fragment in Quirrell with a clarity that made everything retroactively sensible. Charles had shared the Institute's analysis of Harry's power signature and what it suggested about his potential development. Jean had described the Phoenix connection in more technical detail than she'd shared with anyone outside the Institute, and Flitwick had taken 15 pages of notes and looked like a man whose framework had been comprehensively expanded. Logan had said approximately 8 sentences and each of them had been correct. Harry had listened, asked questions, and built the picture. By the time Aurora brought tea and the formal part of the meeting became something more like a conversation, Harry had the shape of what he was dealing with. Voldemort had made 6 Horcruxes, possibly 7. Some were destroyed. Most weren't. Voldemort would return, not if, when, and when he did he would be fully embodied and fully himself, and the fragment in Quirrell would be a point of comparison that made the real thing considerably more serious. "He'll be stronger than anything you've faced so far," Dumbledore said to Harry directly. "I know," Harry said. "So I need to be better." "Yes. I have 6 years," Harry said. "Before I'm 17. Before the protections change and before he'll be confident enough to come directly at me." He looked at the room. "I want to use those 6 years properly." "We'll make sure of it," Logan said. It was the most he'd said at once in 4 hours. Dumbledore looked at Logan. Something passed between them, the specific look of two people who were both, in their different ways, the ones who had kept the boy alive and capable, arriving at the acknowledgement of a shared investment. "I have no doubt," Dumbledore said, and he meant it completely. That evening, after the Hogwarts contingent had gone, McGonagall departing with the air of someone who had revised a great many of her priors in a single afternoon and was going home to integrate them, Flitwick barely containing his excitement about the charm's implications of Phoenix Fire telepathy integration, Dumbledore going with the slightly lighter quality of someone from whom a portion of a very old weight had been redistributed, Harry went out to the grounds. He went to the pond. The ducks were doing their evening business, indifferent to the International Magical Mutant Diplomatic Summit that had just occurred 40 meters away. He sat on the bank and put his hands on his knees and looked at the water. Faint gold in his palms. The fire at rest. He heard Jean coming before she arrived. Her footsteps on the grass, the warmth of her mind on the edge of his awareness, and then she was sitting beside him the way she had sat beside him in gardens and on floors and in hospital wings and common rooms, the simple fact of her being present being its own complete communication. They sat for a while in the last of the summer light. "What are you thinking?" she said. "About the Horcruxes," he said. "About the timeline. About what needs to happen in what order." He paused. "Also about Hermione's 17 questions. I've been putting off writing back and I should do that tonight." Jean made the small sound she made when she was trying not to laugh. "You could do that first." "I could," he agreed. "The timeline will still be there." "The timeline is always there," Harry said. "Voldemort's been a problem since before I was born and he'll be a problem for a while yet. An hour for Hermione's questions isn't going to change the strategic picture." He looked at the water. "She'll have more questions by the time she writes back. She always does." "She sounds like you," Jean said. "She's better than me at most things," Harry said, with the complete absence of false modesty that came from genuinely knowing your own strengths. "She works harder than anyone I've ever met and she cares about accuracy the way Logan cares about technique. She's the best person to have thinking on your side. You should tell her that." "I did," Harry said. "On the train. She told me I was being sycophantic and then she looked very pleased about it." Jean laughed, the real one, full and warm, and the sound of it went across the water and the ducks ignored it and the evening was entirely itself. Harry looked at his hands. The gold warmth, resting. His bones beneath it, the adamantium phoenix metal that had been growing in him for years now, the second skeleton that was his own and not his own and entirely his. He thought about Voldemort feeling it through Quirrell and flinching back. He thought about the mirror in the chamber and his reflection raising its hand. He thought about who he was. A mutant. A wizard. Logan's student. Jean's son in every way that mattered. Charles's student. The boy who lived, though that name sat on him the way borrowed clothes sat, not wrong exactly, just not quite fitted. A telepath. A fire carrier. An 11-year-old who had adamantium in his bones and had looked at Voldemort's fragment and told it, "I know what you are and I know what I am and you should be afraid." And it had been. "Jean," he said. "Yes. I'm not afraid of any of it," he said. "Not as a boast. As a report. I keep checking, because Logan always says you check your actual state and not the state you're performing, and every time I check, it's just, not there. Not Voldemort, not the Horcruxes, not the prophecy. None of it." He looked at her. "Is that wrong?" Jean looked at him for a long moment. The last of the sun was in her hair and her eyes were doing the warm thing, the phoenix thing, the thing that was hers and also theirs. "No," she said. "That's exactly right. You're sure? You were raised by someone who walked into Weapon X's facility to testify against the people who did that to him," she said. "And by someone who carries something ancient and enormous and has never let it become something she serves instead of something she tends." She looked at the water. You were raised on the idea that power without fear is not recklessness. It's clarity. You know what you're facing. You've looked at all of it. And it doesn't frighten you. That's not arrogance, Harry. That's the result of being properly prepared. She paused. It's what we hoped for. He looked at her. You hoped for it? From the first night, she said. When I sat on the floor of the yellow room and felt what was in you. She met his eyes. I hoped we'd get to keep you long enough to see you become this. The warmth between them rose, not dramatically, just the easy rise of a thing that was always there settling into its full register, the phoenix in both of them recognizing the evening and the water and the ducks and the particular gold of the light and calling it good. Harry looked back at the pond. I want to go back to Hogwarts in September, he said. I want to learn everything they have. I want to understand both sides of what I am so completely that there's no angle from which I'm incomplete. You will, Jean said. And I want you and Logan to come with me when things get large. Not to protect me. To stand with you. Yes, Harry said. Exactly that. We will, Jean said. Every time. He nodded. Took a breath of the summer evening, grass and water and the very specific smell of the Institute's grounds, the smell that was home and had been home for 7 years, that was threaded through with the smell of Jean's tea and Logan's bike oil and Aurora's garden and the 10,000 meals eaten in the kitchen and the accumulated quality of a place that had been, unambiguously, the making of him. He thought about the castle in Scotland with its living stones. About Hermione's annotated book lists and Neville's careful plants and McGonagall's precise standards and Dumbledore's fire and Flitwick's enthusiasm and the Sorting Hat's 1,000 years of pattern recognition. About the wand in his pocket, holly and phoenix feather, warm and certain. He thought about 2 worlds, both his, fully and without reservation. He thought, I'm ready for all of you. The gold in his hands burned clean and easy, the way it always burned when he was being most completely himself. The ducks ignored it. The water caught the last light. Somewhere behind them in the Institute, the kitchen was being operational about dinner and Logan was almost certainly already in there. Harry stood up. Dinner, he said. Jean stood with him. What do you want? Whatever Logan's making, Harry said. He won't admit he can cook but he always ends up making the food better. He'll deny that forever, Jean said. I know, Harry said. It's still true. They walked back across the grounds together, the summer evening settling around them, and the warmth between them walked with them, patient and gold and old and alive, the fire that 2 worlds had not made but had found them, that burned now in a boy who had been raised by wolves and fire and was entirely, completely, magnificently himself. He did not look back at the pond. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where he'd come from. He walked forward into whatever was coming next.